Chapter 944. Unlike the last time, Soren's focus was not on the contestants this time. He just paid a little attention to the one-eyed man, and then shifted his attention to other places. This time, Soren increased the difficulty of the trial, and the scale was increased to a small-scale conflict in the Abyss Blood War. It constantly increased the number of the Devil Army, and at the same time, it also allowed the Devil Army to have more elite troops. It had to be said that the idea of transcending time was sometimes a bit lonely. Because although Soren had set some hidden plots and tasks in the trial, none of the contestants had thought of these so far. They were more like warriors to experience the trial. Because Soren had increased the scale of the battle, the probability of the death of the cannon fodder had increased several times compared to the last time. Although the trial battle had just begun, some people had already died in less than 5 minutes. Sauron's focus was on those who died. The first to die was the captain of the Mordor guards. As a mercenary on the devil's side, he was very unfortunate to encounter a 6-armed snake demon. Although this guard captain had the strength of a high grade, in front of the powerful 6-armed snake demon, he was barely able to hold on for about 3 minutes before he was killed. With his death, a trace of soul power was stripped away, and at the same time, the killing power gathered on Soren's body. The dead contestant quickly woke up and was sent back to the real world. When he opened his eyes, the crystal lid of the sarcophagus had been opened, and standing in front of him was a steel golem. "Contestant, you have finished the trial," the steel golem said in a dull voice. "Now, please leave with me." In order to prevent other contestants from being disturbed, there was a special steel golem responsible for guarding here, and its intelligence level was also improved by Alice. The person who had just died was obviously unwilling, but after experiencing death, he seemed a little dispirited, and the shock to his soul was also great. He couldn't help but murmur, "Damn it. If I had another chance, I would definitely be able to escape from the enemy's hands." Without waiting for him to respond, the steel golem had already taken him away. After the contestant got up, the runes engraved in the sarcophagus gradually dimmed. At the moment of his death, these runes all lit up. The battles in the trial were still ongoing. Even though Soren had increased the difficulty of the dungeon by quite a bit, the number of people entering the dungeon had obviously increased, and the number of elites had also increased by a large margin. However, after the first person died and left the trial, more and more people began to die in battle. The steel golems kept bringing people out, and after about half an hour, more than 60 people had died in the trial. But this time, no one died because they couldn't pass the test of will when they returned from death. All the participants who withdrew from the trial only felt a temporary mental weakness. This level of weakness was not enough to threaten their lives. Very good. Looks like my modification was successful. There were more than 100 trial takers, and half of them had already finished the trial. However, none of them had died. This was much better than Soren's last trial. At this moment, only then did he have the time to pay attention to the remaining trial takers. Due to the increase in the number of people, the chances of discovering hidden quests also increased. Those who were able to survive the first half hour were those with better brains. Some of them had already discovered that although they were mercenaries, they could also recruit troops to fight. This greatly reduced the probability of death, and gave them a chance to surround and kill stronger enemies. Soren paid attention to these people while thinking about other things. He muttered, "Looks like the battle flag trial is on the right track. But if I want to promote it, I have to think of another way. Not everyone can pass the battle flag trial and advance. Should I add a point system in the next trial? The points will be based on the number of kills in the battle flag plane. Then I'll give some generous rewards to the outstanding ones. If there really is such an outstanding person who can pass the trial, then even if I give him some divinity points, it won't be a big deal." The trial alone obviously couldn't satisfy Soren's desire to set it up. He felt that he should add something more interesting. Moreover, the battle flag trial was originally designed to have a corresponding reward system. In just a short while, the number of trial takers who died increased again. Now, there were only a dozen or so trial takers left, and the one-eyed man was one of them. He now had a very excited expression. This was because he had just killed a soul judgment demon by himself. This kind of quasi-legendary level enemy, he could only barely survive, but he managed to grab hold of a chance of survival in the battle. This feeling was too wonderful. Although he was now heavily injured and on the verge of death, he was still in a good mood. Next was a wave of large-scale siege. The demon army launched a general attack on the Devil's Steel Fortress. This time, not only did a large number of intermediate demons appear, but even Balers and Balers also appeared. In such an intense battle, the chances of surviving were very low, unless you completed the hidden quest at the beginning, or you had the strength of a high legendary level. So there was no doubt about it. Everyone died in the general attack. When all the trial takers were dead, Soren had time to check his harvest. The slaughter EXP was negligible, and it was all integrated into the battle flag plane. Soren obtained the slaughter energy that was born when the trial takers died. These 100 or so trial takers gave Soren about 20 divine power points. 20 divine power points. When Sauron had just ascended to godhood, he only accumulated 2 points of divine power in a day. These 100 or so trial takers were equivalent to all the divine power points that Soren had accumulated in 3 days, which was equivalent to dozens of fanatics continuously praying. This harvest was too rich. Soren couldn't help but think that if the battle flag plane could be expanded, then wouldn't he be able to easily obtain several times the divine power points of other gods? When the gods descended to the mortal realm, they were all empty. Although Soren's divinity could hold up to 3,000 divine power points, he had never accumulated more than 1,000 divine power points. As long as the battle flag plane could be expanded, then Soren would be able to continuously obtain divine power points. With enough divine power points, Soren could easily enchant a large number of weapons. He only needed to use a few materials to create a first-tier legendary item. Then, the harvest would be directly proportional to the investment. P.S. First update. When Sauron's divine power is full, he can withstand about 33,000 physical damage when he activates Divine Shield. Chapter 945. Divine power was the direct embodiment of power. Not to mention other uses of the divine power value, just in the case of activating the Divine Shield, with Soren's maximum divine power value, he could withstand about 30,000 points of damage. That was 30,000 damage. In the entire multiverse, the number of existences that could cause 30,000 damage to Soren could be counted on one's fingers. This was also the reason why adventurers often failed when they tried to besiege the gods. If there were not enough adventurers, the effective damage caused would not be enough to break through the Divine Shield. Then it would be basically impossible to kill a god in the form of a saint. The third test of the battle banner plane was undoubtedly a success. Because no one died this time, this meant that Soren's magic circle had greatly reduced the possibility of accidents. However, most of the chosen candidates this time were high-grade professions, so Soren still needed to conduct the fourth test. Next time, the scale of the candidates would be expanded, and middle-grade professions would also be chosen. As for the final goal, it was to see if ordinary people could participate in the test. 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. July was coming soon, and when Adele Isabella returned to the Wind Spear Hills, an earth-shattering battle occurred near the volcano in the southwest of the continent. This battle alarmed countless people. But not many people dared to go close to watch, because this time it was the Wind Elemental God and the Earth Elemental God. The Wind Elemental God, Arcady, was the embodiment of one of the basic elements, wind. She was one of the 4 elemental gods, and like the other elemental gods, she didn't have many followers. She seemed to be above time and hadn't changed in the long history. She had some dealings with other gods related to the wind elemental, such as Adele, Fenrir, and Sandaker, but they weren't very close. She didn't pay much attention to her followers. Only when mortals burned precious incense and made the smoke float with the wind to pay respect to her, would she pay more attention to them. She might respond to the prayers of mortals, change the wind direction, stabilize the wind's speed, provide good flying weather, or make rain. She was an ancient god who didn't care. The only thing she didn't like was the earth elemental god. Akadi did everything she could to resist the stubborn earth elemental god, Galanba. The four elemental ancient gods opposed each other. Although they were all gods with great divine power, the number of times they met in their lives was limited, and most of the time, once they met, there was a possibility of fighting. There was no way to know who made the first move. By the time Soren realized that the two elemental ancient gods were fighting, the entire area within a radius of 100 miles had become a battlefield for the wind elementals and the earth elementals. The elemental sovereign gods didn't care about mortals. This was because they did not need the faith of mortals. They did not even care about their own believers, so why would the ancient elemental gods care about the creatures in the material plane? This was the difference in values, and it was precisely because of this difference that the ancient elemental gods did not mind using the material plane as a battlefield for them to defeat their opponents. Galanba was the embodiment of earth, one of the basic elements. He was one of the four elemental gods, and like the other elemental gods, he did not have many believers. He was relatively indifferent to his own believers, and the king of the earth only accepted the pure offerings of his believers without any demands, agate, jasper, or other minerals. Most of the gifts he gave to mortals were all kinds of protective magic, or knowledge about the hidden places and rich mineral veins. However, the more the believers contributed, the more gifts he would give. Most of the time, the earth elemental god was even too lazy to respond to his believers. Such a silent ancient god rarely took the initiative to do anything. Unless he met his old rival, Akadi, who was regarded as frivolous and fickle by the earth elemental god. After the encounter in the material plane, the two, great divine power, elemental ancient gods directly broke out into a fight. They not only fought in person, but also summoned their own huge armies from the elemental plane. When Soren's incarnation arrived, a fissure that was more than 50 kilometers long had appeared on the ground. Volcanoes had erupted due to the fusion of the earth, and the raging storm had destroyed almost everything. Forests, trees, towns, and most of the living people in this area. Fortunately, the area was not densely populated by humans, so the number of deaths should be less than 100,000. The air was filled with violent divine power. This was more powerful than the Lord of Storms. As soon as Soren arrived, he felt the elemental domain. In this area, except for the elemental power of wind and earth, the other elemental powers were completely suppressed. As for the other gods, they fell into silence at this moment because they did not know how to stop this battle. At last, it was the god of light who ended it all. Because it was the two oldest elemental gods who were fighting, in this case, even a mid-level god like Soren was not qualified to intervene. He only saw the god of light appear in the sky, and then after a while, the raging storm gradually stopped, and the earth elemental god and the wind elemental god who were fighting personally left for some reason. They had left. But the elemental army they summoned did not leave. In this land with a radius of more than 100 kilometers, there were almost no other living creatures. There were only endless and violent elemental life forms. Hundreds of thousands of earth and wind elementals were fighting on this land, as if they were still in the midst of a battle that the two main gods had yet to complete. This was the elemental battlefield. It was also one of the events in history that Soren could not stop. Because even after the end of the Avatar crisis, there were still two large elemental battlefields in the material plane, and they would continue until one of these elemental lives won. Hundreds of thousands of mortals died just like that. They were like dust that was wiped away, just because of their insignificance. They disappeared in a battle between the two elemental ancient gods. And no one could do anything for them, even the god of light could only persuade the two elemental ancient gods, because even he was not completely sure that he could defeat one of them. Moreover, the elemental ancient gods did not care about all this, because when they were born, there were no such creatures as human beings in this world. The incident seemed to be over. But Soren knew that it was just the beginning, because it was only the wind elemental god and the earth elemental god. The real disaster of the elemental turmoil was the other two. The elemental god of water. The elemental god of fire. These two were the real problems. Now the gods could only hope that the two of them would not meet, because once water and fire collided, it would be a big explosion. P.S. Grandma was hit by a car when she was walking at night. Fu too is now rushing back to his hometown. The specific situation is not clear. There will be a message. Chapter 946. Shadow Kingdom. After Soren sent the golem puppets into the kingdom, the speed of the growth of the petitioners became very amazing. In almost half a month, a city had been built near the reincarnation pool. This speed was almost comparable to the accumulation of Mordor in the past year. The important reason why this could be done was that Soren had a continuous population in the kingdom. As long as the believers of the original half-elf god and the shadow god were captured, Soren could turn them into his own petitioners. Petitioners were not as weak as mortals. Many petitioners could work for a very long time, which greatly improved the efficiency of construction and made the size of the army expand rapidly. Now, in a city that covered an area of about 5 kilometers, nearly 50,000 petitioners had gathered. Only a small number of these petitioners died in the Battle of Mordor. Most of them came from a siege some time ago. Soren's newly promoted Saint Cardinal captured a great temple of the shadow god, and then all the petitioners gathered in it were transformed into new life forms. This kind of expansion was very efficient. In a short period of time, Soren's army in the kingdom had reached more than 10,000 people. This was a snowball process. The more petitioners followed Soren, the faster the petitioners of the shadow god and the half-elf god were destroyed. In the end, a large number of petitioners were transformed almost every day. The shadow god had existed for about 1,000 years. The half-elf god became a god about 500 or 600 years ago. Although it had experienced the disaster of the Avatar's crisis because of the fall of the gods, the kingdom was not completely destroyed after all. There were still many petitioners who survived. After thousands of years of accumulation, there were traces of petitioners everywhere in the kingdom. Soren now controlled about a third of the land in the kingdom. In addition to the central city that was built by himself, Soren's believers also occupied 3 great temples. These 3 great temples were quickly transformed into Soren's residence. At the same time, the other 2 reincarnation pools were discovered and occupied. One was the Shadow Reincarnation Pool, which was used by the shadow god to transform his believers into shadow life forms. The other was the Half-Elf Reincarnation Pool, which transformed the form into half-elves. These 2 pools were not used at the moment. Soren had to transform them after entering the kingdom, and at the same time, he needed the god's messenger to be responsible for operating them. After this period of buffer, it turned out that the half-elf kingdom and the kingdom of the shadow had almost merged. After the structure of the kingdom was stabilized, the Saint Cardinal also sent the size of the kingdom to Soren through prayers. The size of the kingdom. The merged divine kingdom did not have much sea area. Most of the divine kingdom was made up of land, rich in minerals and forest resources. The former came from the shadow plain, while the latter came from the untamed wilderness. According to Soren's calculations, the entire god's kingdom was about 1.2 million square kilometers after the fusion. This was not a small kingdom. Although the gods could create an independent kingdom of the god's realm, it was already very amazing for a person who had just become a god to have a land of 10,000 square kilometers. The half-plane created by Gloria had only now expanded to an area of about 100 square kilometers. One could imagine how big the gap was between it and the kingdom of the god's realm. The half-plane of the Northern Witch Council had been cultivated for hundreds of years. So far, it was only a few thousand square kilometers, which was at most equivalent to a large meteorite. The area of Soren's kingdom of the god's realm was equivalent to an independent country, a separate world. More than 1.2 million square kilometers of land was enough for him to easily accommodate millions of petitioners. If he had so many petitioners now. Motor City. After completing the 3rd test in the Battle Flag Bit Wall, Soren gained a lot of important gains. During this period of time, with the accumulation of divine power, Soren finally made a very important decision. That was to descend the kingdom of the shadow into the bottomless abyss. This was a very important decision. It not only affected Soren's current power, but also represented the core area of his future priesthood. If Soren used shadow as his core priesthood, then it would be best for his kingdom of the gods' realm to stay in the shadow bit wall. But if he descended the kingdom of the gods' realm to the bottomless abyss, then even if the shadow priesthood was his main priesthood now, it would become a secondary priesthood in the future. The kingdom of the gods' realm descended into the bottomless abyss. Soren's core priesthood must be transformed into slaughter and death. And it was because of the power of slaughter that Soren did not have to worry about the rejection of the abyss. The Shadow Bit Wall. New Moon Year 1677, July 3rd. Today was a day that left a deep impression on all the creatures in the shadow plane. Because since early morning, the whole bit wall began to tremble slightly. It felt like an earthquake, but it did not cause any terrible disaster. At this moment, all the gods who had something to do with the shadow bit wall felt it and looked in the direction of the outer islands. And Soren stood in the clouds and looked down at everything silently, then mobilized his divine power to continue the descent of the kingdom of God. The whole city of Mordor was in a state of alert. Because today, most of Soren's priests had lost their ability to cast spells, and many believers who were not in the city of Mordor could not even connect with Soren. This was the price of descending the kingdom of God. In the process of descending the kingdom of God into the bottomless abyss, most of Soren's energy would be consumed, so he could not respond to the prayers of the believers at all during this time. Looking at the long history, there were not many gods who had really done this. The Queen of Spiders, Lolth, was one of them. In the process of the kingdom of God falling, the gods would be a little weak. Under normal circumstances, it was safer to stay in the kingdom of God at this time, but now Soren could not enter the kingdom of God, so it was safest to stay in Mordor. The trembling of the shadow bit wall lasted all day. However, as Soren's kingdom of God left the shadow bit wall, the trembling that affected the whole bit wall gradually stopped. Saint Form. Realm Lock. After freeing the kingdom of God from the shackles of the shadow bit wall, Soren locked all his mind on the third layer of the bottomless abyss. With the constant consumption of his divine power, Soren's kingdom of God also began to gradually approach the lower layer. This process may last for 3 days, and during these 3 days, Soren was relatively weak. The strict martial law of Mordor would continue until Soren completed the descent of the kingdom of God. The first day. The kingdom of God was close to the spiritual world, and Soren felt a pull. This meant that the priesthood of Soren was accepted by the spiritual world. If he wanted to, he could put the kingdom of God in the spiritual world, and then Soren would have a fit with death. The second day. The kingdom of God was close to the underworld, and Soren felt a strong attraction. This was the acceptance of slaughter and death by the underworld, and the whole underworld was faintly welcoming the arrival of Soren's kingdom of God. If he chose to put the kingdom of God in the underworld, Soren could be sure that there would be no rejection, and he could easily fuse with the underworld. The third day. The kingdom of God finally arrived at the lower layer. But in front of Soren, there was a fork in the road. One led to the Bator Inferno, and the other led to the bottomless abyss. The Bator Inferno welcomed Soren. Although this welcome had nothing to do with the archdevils, and it was just that the law of the plane was compatible with Soren's kingdom of God, it was still impossible for Soren to enter the Bator Inferno. Compared to the welcome of the Bator Inferno, the bottomless abyss was a little repulsive to Soren's kingdom of God. This was the repulsion of the faction. But this repulsion wasn't strong enough, because Soren still had the power of slaughter and death. The 3 death gods had already left their mark in the bottomless abyss, and this mark made it easier for the bottomless abyss to accept Soren's kingdom of God. Soren finally chose the bottomless abyss. His kingdom of God gradually approached the bottomless abyss, and it followed the path of the river Styx from the surface of the bottomless abyss to the third, forgotten land. The bottomless abyss. The third layer. The forgotten land. This day wasn't a good day for most of the demons. This was because there was a huge earthquake in the forgotten land, and then an evil power descended on this land. Only an evil god could make an evil demon feel evil. That's right. Today, the forgotten land welcomed a terrifying evil god. He had placed his kingdom of God in the Forgotten Land, and directly attached it to the third layer of the bottomless abyss. In the past, there were evil gods who placed their kingdom of God in the bottomless abyss, but there weren't many who placed it at the front because the first few layers of the bottomless abyss were too close to the blood war. An evil god's kingdom here could easily affect the variables of the blood war. After a simple collision with the plane, the kingdom of God began to fuse. Just like how the moon rotated around the earth, Soren's kingdom of God was attached to the third layer of the bottomless abyss, but it didn't rotate like the moon. Note, most of the relationship between the kingdom of God and the plane can be understood as the earth and the moon, but the moon can leave the earth and run to Mars or other planets. An evil god had arrived. Not only the third layer of the bottomless abyss, but all the demon lords near the first 10 layers of the bottomless abyss also sensed it. They felt a terrifying evil power. An evil god with at least intermediate divine power had placed his kingdom of God in the bottomless abyss, and attached it to the southwest of the third layer of the bottomless abyss. They felt the aura of slaughter and death. This was the terrifying evil god announcing his existence to the other demon lords and telling them not to provoke him. Otherwise, they would face a terrifying existence who controlled slaughter and death. This day, Soren had arrived in the identity of an evil god. He had officially entered the bottomless abyss. P.S. Because some things involve the criminal part. Fu Tu was so busy that he only had time to write today. I bow and thank everyone. Chapter 947. The arrival of an evil god was like a huge earthquake in the abyss. This was because all the demon lords did not think that a powerful evil god would stay in the god kingdom after entering the abyss. Basically, they would extend their tentacles to a certain level of the abyss. For example, the Queen of Spiders, the goddess of misfortune, and Soren who had officially entered the abyss. The Queen of Spiders and the goddess of misfortune were quite domineering gods. They almost occupied a level of the abyss. Although Soren had not made such a big move yet, his speed was very fast. In the abyss, sometimes it was easier to deal with the demons when they were domineering because they were a group of people who bullied the weak and feared the strong. Evil was sometimes a compliment and flattery in the abyss. On the second day Soren arrived in the abyss, he showed his evil power. Soren directly killed a Baylor demon lord who was entrenched nearby. It was completely unreasonable. The reason Soren killed him was because this Baylor demon lord's land was close to the entrance of his god kingdom, and he did not give him any chance to explain or react. In fact, Soren had waited for an entire night. And the Baylor demon lord did not have the time to make a suitable choice. He could either submit to Soren or leave this land. In any case, Soren would never give up the land at the entrance of his god kingdom to a secondary demon lord. So when the Baylor demon lord did not react in time, it meant that the war had begun. It was a one-sided slaughter. When the heroic spirit army began to appear in Soren's god kingdom, the secondary Baylor demon lord finally realized his fear. But it was all too late. Soren transformed into a saint and directly used terrain change to turn the demon lord's fortress into ruins. Then thousands of heroic spirits led by the Saint Cardinal massacred all the demons. Petitioners could only leave their god kingdom with the permission of the gods. And Soren had to pay a little divine power as the price for this action, so there was nothing to say since the heroic spirit army was mobilized. Kill or banish all the demons within 20 kilometers. Standing in front of Soren was the Divine Kingdom's guard army, which was made up of 3,600 heroic spirits. Among them, there were more than 30 legendary spirits, and even the weakest of them was equivalent to an advanced professional. After entering the God's kingdom, a believer's strength would increase. This was because this was a change on the soul level. Petitioners who were not heroic spirits would have a profession level of at least 5. After becoming heroic spirits, they would quickly approach the level of a mid-grade profession. In order to unify the entire kingdom of God, Soren's heroic spirits had been fighting almost every day. Therefore, they were the most elite of his kingdom of God. Soren's figure hovered in mid-air as he looked down at the land in front of him. He then ordered, priests, set up a magic circle to change the laws of this land. I built at least 3 shrines in a day. The demons had a way to change the laws of the plane, and that was to change the laws of the abyss into order of evil. Soren had a similar method, but he needed his own temple to change the force field of the land. The petitioners began to appear in large numbers. They threw themselves into the process of building the shrines with astonishing efficiency, while the priests began to set up a magic circle that covered an area of 20 kilometers. From now on, this place would become a forbidden zone for demons. Soren would not easily allow other demons to get close to the entrance of the kingdom of God. Therefore, an isolated area would be built here. Assimilating a plane was a huge undertaking, and even a Grand Duke Archdevil would find it difficult to assimilate a plane. However, assimilating a region was much easier. After the petitioners had completed their conquest of the land, Soren began to mobilize the power of his divinity to inject the domain of order into the land. In just a day's time, the laws of this land had changed slightly. Almost all the demons who were close to it felt a little uncomfortable. It was as if they had entered a territory controlled by the demons during the Blood War. However, this was only the beginning. When the news of Soren killing a secondary Balor demon lord reached the ears of the other demon lords, another even more shocking news followed. The one closest to Soren's kingdom of God was a secondary Balor demon lord. Its level was around 27, and it was directly killed by Soren. Then, the one closest to Soren's kingdom of God was the recently risen demon lord beheader, Sauron, Balor demon. The other demon lords were preparing to watch a show. They wanted to see how this Balor demon lord would treat the evil god who had descended from the kingdom of God, and whether there would be a conflict between the two sides. Then, a very shocking piece of news came. When the Balor demon lord Sauron received the news that a secondary demon lord had been killed, he almost went to visit this terrifying evil god in the middle of the night. Then, the Balor lord did not hesitate to pledge allegiance to the evil god and become one of his minions. In just 1 or 2 days, all the nearby demons knew that their demon lord had submitted to the evil god and received the divine power bestowed by the evil god. At the same time, most of the demons had an ambiguous attitude because they did not exclude evil gods who were lawful and evil. Many times, evil gods were easier to deal with than demons. All of a sudden, the structure of the entire third layer of the abyss, the Forgotten Land, changed. Originally, as a newly risen demon lord, the Balor demon Sauron should have been the weakest of the 3 demon lords. The number of demons in the demon army was not as good as the other demon lords. Although the demons had submitted to him, the relationship was not solid and could be persuaded by the other demon lords to betray him at any time. But now, the Balor demon Sauron had suddenly become the most powerful demon lord in the Forgotten Land. The reason was simple. Because there was a terrifying evil god standing behind him. He submitted to the evil god so quickly that the other demon lords suspected that the Balor demon Sauron had already submitted to the evil god. It was because of the evil god's support that he could rise so quickly. No matter what the outside world guessed, Soren would definitely not explain his relationship with the demon incarnation. He only wanted a barely reasonable explanation. As for whether others believed it or not, it didn't matter if they believed it or not. Anyway, he believed it. It was logical. Soren's influence in the third layer of the abyss was rapidly expanding. He still rejected all demons from getting close to the kingdom of God, but in the Galumba arena, he also quickly expanded his influence. Because he would be standing behind the scenes until he controlled the entire Forgotten Land. The one responsible for charging and breaking through the enemy lines was the demon incarnation, Sauron. P.S. The first update. Please recommend it. Chapter 948. The evil god couldn't interfere with the abyss too obviously. Especially when Soren hadn't completely gained a foothold in the abyss. At this time, if he interfered with the abyss too obviously, it would easily cause the other demon lords to unite against him. The demon incarnation's foreshadowing was buried early for this moment. So when the demon avatar was the first to join Soren's side as a representative, a reason that was barely acceptable appeared. Almost on the second day, all the demon lords in the third layer of the abyss sent messengers to express their respect for the powerful evil god, and said that their demons would never interfere with Soren's kingdom. At the same time, even the demon lords in the second and fourth layers of the abyss sent people to express their goodwill. Whether this evil god believed it or not, they had to show their goodwill first. This was because many cunning demon lords had realized that this terrifying evil god was clearly going to kill to establish his might when he first entered the bottomless abyss. There was already an unlucky one who fell. They didn't want to be the second unlucky one to fall. The secondary demon lords were not qualified to challenge the evil god. Even if it was an evil god with minor divine power, it could easily defeat the secondary demon lords with the help of the kingdom. If they wanted to fight against Soren, who had descended into the abyss, they needed to control at least one layer of the abyss. Looking at the entire first few layers of the abyss, only the first layer of the abyss, Pazuzu, was qualified to compete with Soren. But now that this ancient evil existence didn't appear, the others naturally waited and watched. The Avatar Crisis undoubtedly helped Soren in this point, because if it wasn't for the Avatar Crisis, whether it was the Succubus Queen, the Knoll King, or other abyss giants, they wouldn't easily allow Soren to occupy a place in the abyss. Everything was going according to Soren's plan. Although his arrival caused a big earthquake in the abyss, it didn't really affect the survival of other demons. The changes in the power structure at most made the demon lords afraid, but Soren rashly changed the rules of the abyss without enough power, which may cause the entire abyss to reject him. Therefore, Soren did not occupy any of the blood pools. He did not interfere with the chaotic environment in the Forgotten Land, where the demons lived. He only silently occupied a piece of land and then ceded the land to become king. However, some small changes still happened. Not long after Flame Demon Lord Sauron surrendered to the evil god, the other high-level demons soon discovered that their demon lord was wearing a ring at some point in time. It was a golden ring with mysterious characters engraved inside, and the ring contained very powerful evil power. It was just a glance. Everyone could feel the terrifying power contained within the ring. It was enough to easily control any mortal. It was a divine artifact. A divine artifact ring personally forged by the evil god. It contained the divinity and evil will of the evil god, and at the same time, it was unknown how powerful it was. This news spread unknowingly, and soon, the other demon lords knew about it. They were envious and afraid. They were envious that Flame Demon Baelor, Sauron actually had a divine artifact. They were afraid that they didn't know what kind of power this divine artifact had. They were very afraid that Flame Demon Baelor, Sauron would use the power of this divine artifact to deal with them. The outside world called this divine artifact ring One Ring. Although they didn't know what kind of power this divine artifact ring had, no divine artifact could be underestimated because when they were made, it represented that the gods had stripped their own divinity and injected it into it. Mordor City. Stargazing Platform. Soren stood in the clouds and looked down at the entire island of Mordor. He had just returned from the abyss and looked a little tired. Because it was a holy crisis device, he needed to use a lot of divine power to mobilize the petitioners. If Mordor City could provide a lot of divine power to recover, he wouldn't be able to carry out the current plan. Moving in the abyss was like walking on a tightrope. Although Soren seemed to be moving a lot, in fact, he almost didn't show up. Many things were to expand the influence but reduce the changes. Because if there was a war with the demons, the army in the kingdom of God was definitely not enough. There were at least tens of millions of demons in the Forgotten Land. If Soren triggered a large-scale war, the petitioners in the kingdom of God would not be enough even if all of them fought. So the demon incarnation was a good buffer zone. As long as there was a demon incarnation leading the charge, whether there would be a war in the future or not, it would be an internal matter of the demons. He just stood behind as an evil god to support one of the demon lords. He was not involved in the internal power struggle of the demons. Everything about the abyss had not yet reached the point of being activated. There are not enough petitioners in the kingdom of God. Soren looked at the dim starry sky and murmured, "It's not enough to rely on my own strength. I can be a deterrent nuclear bomb. But I can't do it in person. The evil god was a nuclear bomb. The greater significance of Soren's existence was to deter the other demon lords. But the next step of the Kingdom of God's plan needed the petitioners to complete it. Soren needed more heroic spirit army, and at the same time, the demon hunters had to complete a large-scale transformation as soon as possible. No. To complete the next step, I still need the power of a vassal god. Soren needed a vassal god. As an evil god, he could not deal with everything by himself. Although the Maiden of Pain had joined Soren, Soren could not completely trust her, so he had not used the power of the Maiden of Pain. He needed a real vassal god. A vassal god that was completely under his control and did not have to worry about betrayal. For now, Soren did not have a vassal god like that. Vivian was impossible. Soren had done so much, and Vivian had to inherit the fear priesthood. In that case, there were only a few people left to choose from. One was Saruman. He had just reached the legendary realm. Although it was much easier for him to become a god because of the divinity from heaven, his foundation was still too shallow after all. There was still some time before Saruman could become a god. Even with the minor divine power, it would be difficult for him to achieve it quickly. The second was fallen witch Corinne. Because of the last battle, she had the power of divinity, and her strength had reached the advanced legendary realm. This meant that with divinity and divinity, she could obtain any priesthood and become a god. However, this path conflicted with the realm she had originally chosen, because her original intention was to become a great arcanist. Although choosing to become a god would not affect her research, she would eventually have to stand on the side of a god in the future. Maybe I should have a good talk with her. Soren thought about it and finally decided to find a chance to have an in-depth conversation with the fallen witch. With the ability of the fallen witch, with the help of Soren, she should be able to become a god soon. And, according to Soren's memory, there should be a few gods related to magic, mage, and arcana that were about to fall. This meant, if the fallen witch wanted to become a god, she could get a priesthood that was very suitable for her. P.S. Second update. Please recommend it. Chapter 949. The shadow of the evil god shrouded the third layer of the abyss. However, the biggest threat to the material plane was the elemental gods who didn't care about mortals. These four powerful gods were different from other gods. If they were evaluated by the standards of his previous life, these gods didn't have much humanity at all. They didn't care about the life and death of mortals, and they didn't even care about the life and death of elementals. For these gods who had existed for too long, they were used to ignoring life. The war between the wind elemental god and the earth elemental god had just ended. Immediately, there was news that someone saw a huge flame giant near an erupting volcano. No one knew whether it was the fire elemental god or not, but if it was one of the two main gods of water and fire, then the second elemental war was likely to break out soon. History was still going on according to its original trajectory. The war between the elemental gods was like a fuse that caused the gods to become restless. New Moon Era, July 10, 1677. Motor City. An important encrypted document was sent to Soren's study. Soon, a large number of rogues in the Shadow Palace were sent out, and the Church of the Goddess of Whipping also sent out interrogators to inquire about the authenticity of the news. In the study, Soren stood in front of the window and looked into the distance. In front of him was a document with the highest level of encryption, the content of which was related to a god. The god of mages, Azuz. It happened about a day or two ago. The god of mages, Azuz, suddenly lost contact, and all the priests who believed and served him lost their ability to cast spells. At the same time, the Church of the Goddess of Magic was frequently moving, and it was said that there had been a fierce conflict with the Church of the Lady of Night recently. At the end of the document, there was a content that marked all the churches and organizations that believed and served the Lady of Silvermoon. Recently, they had been frequently mobilized, and there were signs of war. If a god lost contact, there was no way to hide it from others. It was like if Soren's priests couldn't cast spells all of a sudden, the news would spread to his enemies and allies within a day. The god of mages, Azuz, was a god with lesser divine power. He was concerned about the development and preservation of magic and was worshipped by all kinds of spellcasters, especially mages. This wise god had long served as an advisor to the goddess of magic. He and Mistress shared a friendly relationship, like that of a teacher and his favorite student. Azuth used the image of an old man with a white beard most often when he walked in the mortal world. He wore exquisite ancient clothes and held a powerful old cane with a gem at the top. The god of mages was the helper of the goddess of magic. Azuz's priesthood was mage, wizard, and spellcaster. His domains included illusion, knowledge, magic, order, and magic. The god of mages was a rather special god. Because he was also a mortal who had ascended to godhood, and he had a close relationship with the ancient thorium age. As a mortal, Azuz yearned for great power. He studied the magic knowledge of the Lost Empire to promote his magic research. Finally, his dedication. This made him the first preacher mage, a position created by the earlier goddess of magic to recognize her most promising mortal students. Then, Azuz tried to cut off part of the divinity of Sarflas and combine it with himself, but the experiment failed. This led to a series of battles with Sarflas, and finally the god was imprisoned in a staff. This god was promoted by the previous goddess of magic, so his relationship with the current goddess of magic was not very good. Azuz was the companion and student of the previous goddess of magic. Before the outbreak of the Avatar crisis, he had been trying to adapt to the new goddess of magic and learn how to help her. The problem was Azuz. As one of the few gods who had a direct relationship with magic, after Azuz mysteriously lost his connection, there were some riots in the church that served the goddess of magic. Then, a special assassination force emerged on the surface. Soren turned and picked up an emblem on the desk, which was engraved with the shadow of a black moon. The Black Moon Monks. An evil organization most favored by the Lady of the Night, the elites of the elites in the church. Most of the members were powerful monks and sorcerers. They were the sharp blades of the Lady of the Night. With the power of the Shadow Weave, the Black Moon Monks had always been carrying out the highest level missions of the Lady of the Night. They even assisted the Lady of the Night in killing Albedo, the god who was in charge of the caves and the Underdark. Even the Black Moon Monks had been mobilized. Soren silently put down the emblem in his hand and murmured, "It seems that the Lady of the Night is really ready for war." Since the gods fell into the mortal world, all the gods were preparing for both sides. The fact that the Lady of the Night chose to make a move at this time obviously meant that she was ready for a full-scale war. At the same time, the Church of the Goddess of Magic and the Church of the Lady of the Silver Moon were frequently mobilized, all of which indicated that the open and secret struggle between them was about to be put on the table. A head-on collision between the two divine systems. This would obviously affect both the good and evil camps. The evil camp led by the Lady of the Night, and the good camp led by the Lady of the Silver Moon and the Goddess of Magic. Although there were other powerful gods who were not involved, some things would not be so easy to stop once they started. "Come." Accompanied by Soren's voice, a half-elf woman covered in a black cloak suddenly appeared. She knelt in front of Soren on one knee and said, "My lord. What are your orders?" Soren looked down at the young half-elf in front of him. Although she was less than 20 years old, the half-elf in front of him was already a legendary rogue. Of course, this power was not completely obtained by her own training, but it came from Soren's power. God's chosen. That's right. This was one of the powers that Soren secretly created. After becoming more familiar with the power of the gods, Soren discovered a little secret, that was, not only could he give divinity, but he could also give slaughter EXP to his fanatics to improve their power. Of course, this was only limited to fanatics. As a result, a group of legendary rogues promoted by Soren appeared. They could mobilize the shadow power, and they were the top assassins and rogues. They were responsible for dealing with important matters that Soren could not be involved in. They were independent of the church's system and directly under Soren's personal control. At present, there were a total of 12 of these chosen. Soren paused and said, immediately send someone to investigate the movements of the Black Moon monks, and pay close attention to the mystery knights. The god of mages was missing. It was very likely that he was seriously injured or dead. This god was in charge of a very important clergy. Whether it was magic or the clergy of magic, Soren was very interested in it. Even if he finally chose death and slaughter, as a part-time arcanist, he could still have a secondary clergy, or even leave it to Gloria or the fallen witch. And the most important point. That was, the god of mages, Azuz, had a part of the authority of the magic net. One of his clergy tasks was to assist the goddess of magic in managing the magic net. At the same time, Azuz also monitored most of the magic net in the material plane and was responsible for repairing and perfecting the coverage of the magic net. In other words, he himself controlled a very important part of the power inside the magic net. No one knew the whereabouts of the goddess of magic. However, the location of the god of mages' disappearance was leaked in the intelligence. Soren was in charge of the tracking clergy. As long as there was a clue, it was very possible to find the god of mages. Magic net, magic, spells, illusions, war flag plane, trial. Words flashed through Soren's mind. The outbreak of the god of mages completed a very important part of his plan. No matter what, Soren had to find a way to get a clergy from the god of mages. Whether it was magic, illusions, or spells, they were all very important to Soren. Because so far, most of Soren's clergy served the rogue profession. Soren lacked a clergy that could maximize the power of his arcanist and wizard profession level. This was also a shortcoming of his strength, so many times he was not like a real spellcaster compared to Gloria and the fallen witch. It seems that I have to talk to the fallen witch in 2 days. Soren quickly thought of the fallen witch. She also had divinity and was one of the few people Soren could trust. He could not transfer his main clergy to magic, so in the end, he still needed a subordinate god who was in charge of magic to assist him. The fallen witch had integrated part of the divine power, and she was the most suitable candidate at present. The city of Mordor was still accumulating strength. The Abyss could not make too big a move recently to prevent the demon lords from repelling and counterattacking on a large scale. The demon hunters created by Soren were accumulating little by little. At present, the scale of the demon hunters had expanded to more than 300 people. With the connection of the Kingdom of God and the Abyss, the efficiency of the transformation of the demon hunters was gradually increasing. Soren planned to attack the Throne of Fear around September. In other words, Soren still had about 2 months to do other things. The war between the Lady of Night and the Lady of Silvermoon seemed inevitable. Soren did not want to join either side, but he wanted to get some benefits from it. He needed more clergy. Because if Soren did not intend to strip his clergy and give it to his subordinate gods, then he needed to take clergy from other gods. Chapter 950. The gentle evening breeze blew in his face. Soren walked near the port of Port Tylon in a cloak. The naval fleet of Mordor was docked here, but none of the officers and soldiers recognized him. Instead, they were busy counting the captives transported this time. The Sixth Fleet of Mordor had recently had a small-scale conflict with the navy of the Principality of Rossard. The victory belonged to Mordor without a doubt. Brother. Standing next to Soren was Vivian in a pink cloak. The hood covered her future beauty. She held Soren's hand tightly and said softly, "Why do I feel like a long time has passed?" Soren smiled and stroked Vivian's little head, and said softly, "It has indeed been a long time. It's been almost 2 years." Both of them were in disguise, and it seemed that they did not want to disturb the soldiers of Mordor. Vivian looked into the distance and said softly, "I miss Amber City and Sister Annalyn a little. I don't know what Amber City has become." 2 years passed in the blink of an eye. The end of the Avatar crisis was getting closer and closer. The gods had revealed their traces in the mortal world, and the next battle would be more and more intense. Soren fell into silence. Vivian had not returned to Amber City yet, but the city had really fallen. He said softly, "Annalyn? She should still be in Amber City." I saw her once. She opened an orphanage in the ruins of the church district. We can visit her on this trip. Soren calculated the time. According to the original historical progress, the King of Dawn would fall this month. If the King of Dawn fell, Annalyn would become a wild priest without a god. Soren thought maybe he could visit her on the way. The two of them moved along the street. Because of the influence of Mordor, Port Tylon did not fall because of the turmoil. On the contrary, it was more prosperous than at the beginning. However, after leaving Port Tylon and approaching the City of Wealth, the scene in front of them immediately became barren. Most of the farmland was overgrown with weeds. Unlike the fields full of crops in Mordor City, nearly 1/3 of the land here was abandoned, even near the suburbs. As for the land a few kilometers outside the city, it was basically completely abandoned. The two of them passed by a few villages along the way. There were only 100 or 200 people living inside, and they were very vigilant against outsiders. They hid behind tall wooden walls and refused to be visited by others. The upheaval made them suffer unspeakably, and they lost their goodwill and friendliness toward the outsiders. The ruins of the City of Wealth still remained. Soren saw the numb faces of the people. The Saint Samurai had purified the city, but then darkness once again shrouded the land. The gray energy could never be completely eliminated, so he could only think of ways to restrain them. Just like that, the two siblings traveled in silence. Everything they saw and heard along the way made them sigh with emotion. Vivian seemed to have grown up quite a bit. Most of the time, when she saw everything in front of her, she couldn't help but ponder in silence. Soren was training her. Because Vivian was too young. But time couldn't wait. Vivian's ascension was just around the corner, and what Soren could do was to let her see everything in the mortal world before she ascended. This would be of great benefit to her future. Because only by knowing what mortals needed could she understand what she should do as a god. History moved forward according to the original schedule. Shortly after Soren left the City of Wealth with Vivian, a fierce battle broke out near the ruins of the original Silvermoon City. The secret knights of the Goddess of Magic and the followers of the Lady of Silvermoon had a very fierce battle with the followers of the Lady of Night. The flames of war flattened a nearby forest. At least 10 legendary professions participated in the battle, and some of them fell. The gods had been patient for too long. When this patience could no longer be restrained, it was time to really do it. The drows began to appear in the surface world blatantly. The giant web woven by the Queen of Spiders had begun to launch. She unified most of the forces in the Underdark and launched an attack on the elves of the surface world. Of course, these were actually small skirmishes. The real battle broke out 3 days later, when Soren and Vivian arrived near the Agate River. A battle between the gods broke out. Soren and Vivian were not there, but when they realized all this, the 2 stars in the sky had completely disappeared and then fell like meteors. The Dawn Lord. The god of cruel officials. The kingdoms of the 2 gods fell like dazzling fireworks, and at the same time, the scattered divinity began to automatically find a host. The fall of the Dawn Lord was within Soren's expectations. However, the death of the god of cruel officials was still a little beyond his expectations, because this god was also known as the Devil of Cruel Officials and the 10th Lord of the 9 Hells. His name was Gagos, and he lived in the Bator Inferno. His clergy was betrayal, cruelty, political corruption, and powerful cruel officials. This was a god of lawful evil. Although he only had weak divine power, it was not easy to deal with him. The information Soren received was not clear, but he knew that this was a battle between lawful evil and lawful good, and the Queen of Spiders also appeared. She took away the craftiness of the god of cruel officials. However, all of this was just the beginning. When Soren arrived near Amber City, the battle was getting fiercer and fiercer, and the 3rd fallen god appeared. The god of literature. The god of literature, Denel, was a god of neutral good. As a non-combat god, he was involved in the Battle of Gods and was easily killed by the Lady of Night. In the dark. It seemed that the Lady of Night and the Queen of Spiders had joined forces, and they had formed some kind of tacit understanding between them, each seeking what they needed. The god of literature and the god of magic had a good relationship, and his fall seemed to mean that the enemies of the goddess of magic were ready for a full-scale war. Soren could be sure of one thing, that was, the goddess of magic had returned, but she did not appear, and it seemed that she did not tell Soren about her plans. Amber City appeared in front of him. But when Soren saw the city again, he could not help but fall into silence. Because today's Amber City was even more dilapidated than the last time he came here, and he even saw bones that no one had collected by the city walls. The guards were all sallow and emaciated, standing weakly at the city gate. Their expressions were numb, and they could not see any hope. The once prosperous dock area had turned into ruins. When Soren walked into the once familiar city with Vivian, the population inside was less than 1/3 of the original population. The temple area seemed to have been destroyed as well. Soren could not see any believers heading to the temple area along the way. Many temples of the gods had been moved out of the ruined city, and the Dawnlight Temple, which had always been here, could no longer be seen from afar. Soren could no longer see the light that shrouded the temple. With the fall of the Dawnlight King, all the priests who served him lost their divine powers, and at the same time, the believers who believed in him quickly dispersed. P.S. First update. There is one more chapter today. Chapter 951. The Avatar Crisis made the gods no longer superior. Although there had been battles between the gods, no matter how many casualties there were, the churches and believers were ultimately affected. But now everything was different. Failure meant that the gods might fall forever. The fall of the Dawn Lord was inevitable. Because he was too close to the God of Light, and his power was not strong enough. As a god who inherited part of the original God of Light's priesthood, the Dawn Lord was only a lesser god. As long as he was caught in a battle, many gods of the Order Evil Alignment would not hesitate to kill him. The Dawn Lord was dead. Part of his divinity and priesthood returned to the God of Light, and the other part was scattered in the material plane. After the fall of this god, all the temples that served him were destroyed in just a few days. The Church of the Dawn Lord was merged with other gods, and the believers began to believe in other gods without hesitation after the fall of the god. The priests lost the ability to cast divine spells. Under such circumstances, only a few priests would stick to their faith, and most of them would quickly join other churches. The light on the temple had dissipated. When Soren arrived at the temple with Vivian, he found that everything inside seemed to have been ransacked. Soren mobilized a trace of divine power. As the priesthood of tracking was activated, he looked at the temple for a while, and then whispered to Vivian, "It wasn't the thugs who attacked the temple. The priests who originally belonged here stole the valuable things in the temple and left overnight. Even the god who served them had fallen. The remaining priests who were not determined enough naturally began to make plans for themselves. They stole the gold and silver items in the temple at night, and then secretly left Amber City. Brother, sister, give me something to eat." A little girl who looked about 6 or 7 years old appeared in front of the two. She was wearing shabby clothes full of patches, but she was still clean. At this moment, she was looking up at the two of them with her little head raised and begging with her little hands covered in mud. Her eyes were a little timid, but she still mustered up the courage to stand in front of them. Vivian's sympathy was immediately aroused by this little girl who was even younger than her. She hurriedly took out a pile of food and handed it to the little girl. At this moment, only then did they realize that there were quite a few children in the corner of the courtyard. They were all 7 or 8 years old. When they saw Vivian taking out the food, they immediately gathered around. There were more orphans here. And it seemed like the gems Soren left behind didn't improve everything. These children weren't in a good situation. Although they weren't emaciated, they still looked a little sickly. The fall of the Dawn Lord had completely destroyed everything. Annalyn borrowed the power of the temple to take in so many orphans, but when the gods she served fell, everything that supported the operation of the orphanage disappeared. "Let's go." Soren patted Vivian's head and said, "Let's take a look inside the temple." Vivian nodded obediently, then held Soren's hand, and whispered, "Big brother, I'm sorry. These children are so pitiful. Let's adopt them and take them to Mordor." Soren nodded without saying a word. The temple was empty at first. Originally, there was a pool in the front yard of the temple. There were copper dirhams thrown in by the believers, but now they had all been taken away. There were only some white pebbles left in the pool. The boxes that were placed in the temple were gone. It seemed that in order to save lamp oil, the whole temple was dark and looked a little gloomy. "Lena." A young woman's voice sounded, and then a girl about 15 or 16 years old wearing a priest's robe appeared. She was stunned when she saw Soren and Vivian, then she waved to the orphans outside the courtyard. Then, the young priest said to the two in a low voice, "The Dawn Lord has fallen to protect justice. If you need divine healing, I'm afraid you'll have to go somewhere else." She regarded Soren and Vivian as adventurers. Soren glanced at the little girl, and there was a rare smile on his face. The little girl in front of him was very good to be able to hold on to her faith after the fall of the god, and she was only an apprentice priest. He walked towards the temple and said, "Where's Annalyn?" Hearing the name in Soren's mouth, the little girl raised her head in surprise, then said, "Sister went to the mercenary guild. All the gold and silver wares in the temple had been stolen. She needs to take on quests to feed these children." At this time, she had already recognized Soren because Soren had been here once. Soren nodded and said, "When will she come back?" The little girl replied, "Should be tomorrow morning." Annalyn was a priest and a warrior. Even if she lost her divine spells, she still had some combat power. It seemed that she really worked hard for these children. "We'll stay here today." Soren reached out and held Vivian's hand, then walked into the dark temple. The little girl seemed to know that Soren's identity was not ordinary, so she whispered, "Okay. Please come with me." "Ugh. The temple doesn't have any money. There's no light in the front hall, so we'll be staying in the back hall." At this point, the little girl's expression was a little embarrassed. A temple should have a lot of wealth, but unfortunately, some of it was stolen by other priests, and a large group of orphans were raised. Looking at the little girl's face, it was obvious that she was not eating well recently. There were still leaves in her teeth, and there was hard black bread on the table not far away. Back in Amber City, Soren had tasted it before. It was like chewing on a piece of wood. Soren did not say anything. When he stepped on the first step of the temple, the lights in the temple lit up automatically, even though there was no oil left. If a temple was not abandoned, there would always be light inside. The altar in the shrine of Sauron was lit day and night. Unless the shrine fell that day, the priests would check it every day. When Sauron stepped into the temple, he was stunned. In an instant, the entire temple was brightly lit. All the lights were lit, but it was not the lights that illuminated the temple, but the light that was visible to the naked eye. When Soren's figure stepped into the temple, the light automatically appeared. The originally dim temple was suddenly shrouded in the light of divinity, but it did not come from the Dawn Lord, but from Soren. As a god who walked in the mortal world, any temple would sense him, especially a temple that was currently ownerless, unless he deliberately concealed his identity as a god. On the other side, the young girl's face was full of shock, as if she had thought of something. She suddenly felt a little weak in her legs, and she seemed to be unable to stand. Because she knew Soren's identity. She thought that Soren was a powerful adventurer, but she never thought that Soren was a true god who walked in the mortal world. P.S. Second update. Grandma will be discharged from the hospital in a month or 2. But now she is taken care of by Aunt, so Fu too can come back and write in peace. Chapter 952. The little girl was so excited that she couldn't sleep all night. Because after knowing Soren's identity, she was stunned. As a trainee priest, she had never seen a true god. Although many gods fell to the mortal world after the outbreak of the Avatar crisis, only a few mortals could meet them. What made her most excited was that she had met this true god before, and it seemed that he was Sister Annalyn's friend. Oh my god. Sister Annalyn actually had a true god as a friend. Why didn't she tell me? The little girl spent the night indulging in her thoughts. She only managed to fall asleep at dawn, but she was quickly awakened by a noise outside the door. Inside the temple. Soren also didn't sleep all night. In fact, sleep was just a habit at his level. Brother. Vivian sat next to Soren, sorting out what she had seen and heard along the way. As a very smart girl, she also knew that it would be difficult for her to have such an opportunity in the future. The little girl raised her head and asked, "Why is Mordor prosperous, but other places are getting more and more desolate? Is it because of the war?" This was the biggest question in the little girl's mind. The desolation she saw along the way was completely different from what she had seen in the past. Everything was completely different from Mordor, and many places had almost become ruins. Soren raised his hand and stroked Vivian's little head, and said slowly, "Because of order. In fact, the prosperity of Mordor was not created by my power alone. But as long as there is order, all the people living in Mordor will consciously create a better living environment. Because of order, Mordor is orderly, and everyone has their own duties." Is there no war in Mordor? No. Mordor has wars breaking out almost every month, and the frequency of attacks is probably more than most cities here. But the order of Mordor ensures that these wars are away from civilians, and the army keeps most of the wars out of Mordor Island. And civilians can work in peace. And what did the turmoil bring? Civilians abandoned their land because of the war, and the army couldn't operate effectively because of the lack of supplies. In the end, everything became a vicious cycle. Order was crumbling more and more, and the turmoil was becoming more and more serious. Civilians began to leave their homes, and the morale of the army also waned. The war in Mordor City was endless. From attacking the natives to fighting the Principality of Rossard, there were battles almost every month. Although Soren lived in seclusion in the Outer Islands, he had barely escaped from the battles that should have broken out during the Avatar crisis. The attacks of the demons, the sneak attacks of the devils, and the subsequent elemental turmoil. Until now, there were rampaging water elementals attacking the fleet near Mordor City. But so far, the city of Mordor had not been affected much, because most of the wars were blocked by the army outside the city. Order created a stable living environment for the commoners, and this living environment allowed the commoners to work in peace and create wealth and resources. Vivian couldn't help but fall into deep thought. With her age, it would take some time for her to understand everything, but Soren wasn't in a hurry at all. He hoped to convert Vivian into the camp of order. Even if she couldn't, he hoped that the little girl could remain neutral, because chaos was not a very good camp, and the clergy of the Lord of Fear had always been chaotic and evil. The rise of Mordor City was not something that could be created by personal strength. If Soren only relied on personal strength, Mordor City would probably still be the fortress of the local tyrant, and it would never have such a great influence on the south coast. Soren created an order. This order was fighting against the chaos of the Avatar crisis. In order to gain power, to gain strength, to prove themselves, and to live a better life, countless people joined Mordor City for various reasons, and consciously maintained Soren's order, and then found their own place in it. Soren could now manage Mordor City freely because of the corresponding operating system brought by the order. In Mordor City, Soren had everything they needed. Whether it was the wealth, power, status, and strength they needed when they were alive, or the divine kingdom they sought after death, Soren could satisfy these people. And for their own future, in order not to fall into the abyss of hell in the future, even the evil people had to follow Soren's rules. This was the key to why Mordor City stood tall in the Outer Islands. To live. They needed everything that Soren gave them. After death. They also needed everything that Soren gave them. Because of this, even corruption in Mordor City was much less than in other places. Although Soren allowed the darkness under the rules, they would still be punished if they were found out. Most of the officials in Mordor City didn't dare to say that they were honest, but they knew clearly what they could take and what they couldn't take. Because if they gave up their position in the divine kingdom for hundreds of years in the future for a little benefit when they were alive, this was absolutely not a good deal. The life of a mortal was only 100 years. Many officials in Mordor City were just ordinary people. They believed in serving Soren, and of course, they pursued more than a little enjoyment in the mortal world. They hoped to get a higher status, a longer life, and more power after entering the divine kingdom. Soren still had a lot to give to Vivian. But some things still needed to be understood by the little girl herself, because in the future, she needed to be in charge of her own faith and serve her own church, which could not be replaced by any god. Dawn was approaching. When there was a glimmer of light in the sky, a girl in leather armor appeared outside the temple. Annalyn. After losing the ability of a priest, she could only perform the tasks of the mercenary union as a warrior. There was a wound on her shoulder. Because there was no way to use magic, she simply bandaged it. Sister Annalyn. Vivian ran over with some excitement, and Soren's figure also appeared in the temple. He looked down at the girl in front of him, slowly came to her, and said in an indisputable tone, "Follow me. Take all the orphans you can take, and I will arrange a place for them to live and grow up healthily." A reason that could not be refused. When Soren's voice fell, the last trace of the girl's stubbornness completely dissipated. Because she knew very well that after losing the magic of a priest, it was impossible for her to raise so many orphans, so she could not refuse Soren's conditions at all. P.S. The first chapter. There is one more chapter. Chapter 953. Gods shouldn't sign favors. In any case, Annalyn helped Soren and Vivian when they were at their weakest. So this time Soren came here to find out what was on his mind. Because with the end of the Avatar crisis, Soren would eventually return to the Kingdom of God. Once he returned to the Kingdom of God, Soren would naturally not be able to walk around the mortal world as he did now, so it was better to deal with some things as soon as possible. Annalyn had adopted about 20 or 30 children. Compared to the past, the girl's face was less beautiful and more determined. In fact, Soren admired her behavior a little. And Yali could be said to be a very good girl to be able to persist in her beliefs and adopt so many orphans in this cannibalistic era of the Avatar crisis. With her beliefs, she believed that most gods would not refuse her, so Soren just took the initiative. When the other gods didn't pay attention to her, she took advantage of her original relationship to extend an olive branch first. With a little bit of divine brilliance. Soren gently waved his hand, and the wound on Annalyn's body disappeared. He smiled slightly, then suddenly turned his head and frowned as he looked outside the temple. He whispered, "Are you in trouble?" Several mercenaries with unfriendly expressions were approaching. The leader was a middle-aged man with an unruly expression. He should be a high-grade professional. He had a heavy sword hanging on his back. Next to him should be his teammates. They all had a murderous aura. Obviously, they were people who had seen blood all year round. "Boss. That little bitch still refuses to obey you. This time we must teach her a lesson. Does she still think she's the priest of the Church of Dawn? The King of Dawn is dead. She can't even cast a single divine spell now. I saw her follow Kata and the others to encircle the knolls yesterday. She was fighting like a warrior." The one who spoke was a hook-nosed rogue. Soren's perception had already covered a range of hundreds of meters, so the others didn't hear what he said, but Soren immediately understood what happened. Obviously. When a person, especially a woman, fell into the dust from a glamorous place, all kinds of monsters would come out. Amber City had always been a place of gray areas. Even when Soren was still here, there were many gray organizations in Amber City. Now, it was clear that someone had set their sights on Annalyn. She was a priest who had lost the protection of her god and could no longer cast divine arts. She was young and beautiful. He used to be a high-ranking cleric in Amber City, and his status in the city was not low. With such an identity and such an appearance, who knew how many jackals, wolves, tigers, and leopards had been eyeing them covetously when they had fallen to their lowest point. And the group in front of them was undoubtedly the first to make a move. "I heard that there's a pretty little girl by her side." Hee hee. "Boss, when we take her down, leave the little girl to us." The one who spoke was another warrior. As if he had thought of something, he could not help but chuckle. Soren narrowed his eyes slightly. To be honest, he was not angry because the Avatar crisis had already destroyed all order. It was normal for such a thing to happen. The same thing was happening in many places. That was why he was so obsessed with the order of Mordor City. Only order could maintain the existence of law and deter these evil people. The sound of footsteps sounded outside the temple. At this time, other people also noticed that outsiders were approaching. The orphan adopted by Annalyn hid behind with some fear. When she saw these people, Annalyn's expression also became ugly. It seemed that it was not the first time these people had troubled her. Little, the hook-nosed rogue walked over arrogantly. He seemed to want to swear, but when he saw Annalyn's cold eyes, he swallowed it back. After all, she was a priest who presided over a temple. She still had the pressure of the past, and her momentum still suppressed the other party. However, what followed was the hook-nosed man's embarrassment and anger. Do you still think you're a high and mighty priest? It's best if you know what's good for you. Humph. Otherwise. Only then did the hook-nosed man notice the existence of outsiders. Soren and Vivian's level suppressed them too much. Unless they saw it with their own eyes, they would not be able to perceive the existence of the two of them. After seeing Soren and Vivian, these people in front of them were obviously a little surprised, but the difference in strength was too big to see the difference, so they seemed to be fearless. Sister Annalyn. Are they looking for trouble with you? Vivian tilted her head and walked to Annalyn's side, then held her slender hand. The little girl spoke with a murderous aura. However, Soren didn't want Vivian to do it, because she was still too young, and it was not good for her to have a murderous aura. He glanced at the person in front of him, and then frowned. Because the rogue still had the emblem of his church on his chest. The hook-nosed rogue in front of him was a believer who served him. Well. It was inevitable that a new church would have good and bad people. Annalyn also seemed to see the emblem, and then her expression became a little playful. She quietly took a step back, intending to leave the matter to Soren. Because in this case, Soren seemed to really need to take care of it. Group human immobilization. Soren looked down at the group of people in front of him and waved his hand to cast a group immobilization spell. This time, these people in front of him finally realized that something was wrong. Because they couldn't move at all now. There was no need to waste time with these mortals. Soren slowly came in front of them and whispered, "Who told you to do this?" The middle-aged man in the lead looked frightened and stuttered, "I. Finger of death." The corpse that completely lost its vitality fell down, and Soren turned to look at the second person. I'll talk. It's Sir Henry. He was once scolded by Miss Annalyn, so he has been holding a grudge. Let's find trouble with Miss Annalyn. The second mercenary immediately knelt down and told him everything he knew. Soren's expression was calm, and with a wave of his hand, another corpse fell down. He mercilessly erased the lives of these people, and finally he came in front of the hook-nosed rogue. Then, Soren slowly took off his hood. My lord. The hook-nosed rogue was frightened in an instant. His whole body was paralyzed in place, his face was ashen, and his whole person was full of despair. He had seen Soren's statue before. And when Soren no longer hid his power, he instantly knew the identity of Soren. He was the god he believed in and served. Then, he was so scared that he peed his pants. God. He actually offended the true god he served. As a rogue, he actually offended the master of shadows, the true god of rogues. Kill yourself. Soren looked down at the rogue in front of him with a cold expression and said slowly, after entering the kingdom of God, you will serve 100 years of hard labor. After your sentence is over, I will give you a chance to start anew. Despair. Endless despair. The rogue in front of him almost didn't dare to imagine his fate, but after hearing Soren's words, a glimmer of light burst out of his eyes. My lord. After knowing that he still had a chance to enter the kingdom of God, the rogue in front of him knelt down with a humble expression. He respectfully knelt down in front of Soren, then pulled out the curved sword at his waist and stabbed his own heart without hesitation. The approaching death made his body twitch, but he still used the last of his strength to maintain his kneeling position. A little bit of gray light appeared. Soren spread out his palm and collected the soul of the believer in front of him. It was a gray soul with a bloody light, and it must have done a lot of evil things in its life. Purify. A little bit of light appeared and turned the soul in front of him into a white shadow. Then Soren waved his hand and sent it into the kingdom of God. No matter what he did, he had now paid the price. Soren meant what he said. As long as he served 100 years of hard labor, he would treat the soul of the believer as an equal. P.S. Second update. Chapter 954. The cold corpses were placed in front of him. When Sauron revealed his identity as a true god, one or two figures instantly appeared in the direction of Amber City. They leaped from roof to roof at an astonishing speed and quickly approached the temple area like martial arts masters. My lord! My lord! A half-elf man appeared in front of the Dawnlight Temple and knelt in front of Soren with a panicked expression. He was the deacon of the Thieves' Guild. As a god who held both rogue and shadow, more than 70% of the people in the Thieves' Guild believed in and served Soren. Part of Mordor's intelligence network came from the Thieves' Guild. Otherwise, Soren wouldn't be so well informed. As for the dark net controlled by the temple, it was a special channel that directly reached Soren's hands. Ordinary people couldn't know about it at all. The other man was an assassin. Mordor had its own eyes and ears in many cities. They sensed Soren's presence and quickly approached. Deal with these corpses. Soren's expression was calm. He waved his hand and pointed to the corpses on the ground, and then said, "There is a man named Sir Henry. Send someone to deal with him. Then you contact Mordor. Send someone to pick up all the children here." The last sentence was said to the Thieves' Guild. After listening, the deacon understood what Soren meant, and a trace of killing intent appeared in his eyes. Whether the other party was a noble or not, since he offended a true god, then his fate was doomed. Soren didn't have any good feelings for the nobles of Amber City because there were few good people here. He grew up in the slums of Amber City. The assassin from Mordor also took the order and left. Since Soren wanted to take these orphans away, he naturally had to deal with them himself. Wait a minute. At this time, Annalyn suddenly said softly, "Can you take away all the orphans in Amber City?" There were at least hundreds of orphans living near the docks after the chaos of war. If you don't take them away, I'm afraid their end will be. At this point, Njali couldn't help but hesitate. She knew that her relationship with Soren wasn't that deep. Even though she had helped the two siblings before, she had already done her best to take these orphans away, not to mention the fact that she had helped him last time. If she were to ask Soren to take away all the orphans in Amber City, she was afraid that Soren would be displeased. Sure. In the face of Njali's request, Soren simply nodded and agreed, but then he said, "But you have to go to Mordor with me. In the future, I will leave them to you to manage. I will arrange accommodation, food, and school for them. But I don't have the time to arrange for someone to take care of them. Since you requested to bring them over, then you will be in charge of them in the future." It was Soren's idea to take Annalyn away. The turmoil of the Avatar crisis would become more and more serious. Amber City was not a place to stay for a long time. Letting her follow him to Mordor City would easily cause rebellious emotions. Soren used this as a reason to let Njali go with him. Mordor City needed some children with no background. They could be sent to the academy as apprentices in the future. A little investment was worth it. These children could repay everything they owed now through work in the future. Soren never liked charity. He would only give these people a chance to create a future. As for whether they could seize it or not, it was up to them. If they didn't know how to seize the opportunity, then it didn't matter if such people died. Njali was silent. Then she nodded gently, seemingly accepting Soren's arrangement. Great. Vivian's expression was very excited. She grabbed Njali's hand and said happily, "Sister, come with me to Mordor City. This way, we can keep each other company." After all, she was still a child. When meeting people she used to be familiar with, she didn't know how to control her emotions. Mordor City was running extremely efficiently. Especially since Soren personally gave the order, some people arrived at Amber City through the portal that afternoon. The news was leaked for some reason. When these children were gathered, some refugees also gathered. Many people knelt in front of the dock and begged the messenger of Mordor City to take them away. They also patted their chests and promised that they would work hard and be obedient. Soren's order was to take away the orphans. The people of Mordor City had always been military style. Therefore, these refugees were not accepted. However, no one knew who was soft-hearted in the end and secretly leaked a little news, so the refugees gathered at the Dawnlight Temple and knelt outside the temple to pray to priest Njali. The final result. It was Njali who came to Soren with a blushing face again with a hint of shame. "Then take them away together." Soren frowned slightly when he heard the words, and then ordered, "Finish the matter tomorrow, don't delay too long. Otherwise, the nearby refugees will gather." The city of Mordor had gradually become an overseas refuge on the road. Now that the population was almost saturated, Mordor City could only continue to absorb people after the third and fourth phases of the project were completed. So this time, the final number of people was more than 2,000. The number of orphans was more than 500, and the rest were refugees and civilians with their families. These people were the easiest to control and settle. Vivian was sent back to Mordor City. Soren, on the other hand, had only appeared in Amber City for a day before disappearing without a trace. This time, the destination of the trip was Amber City, and the purpose was to let Vivian see everything in the mortal world. It was not suitable for the little girl to accept too many things at once, so after dealing with all this, Soren should also be busy with his own things. Tracking the God of Mages. The last place where the God of Mages disappeared was in the ghost forest north of Whiterun City. There was also a creature that everyone was very familiar with nearby. It was the ancient red dragon that had lurked in the material plane a long time ago. Because of Soren's interference in history, the old red dragon was still alive and well. Perhaps because too many gods had appeared, it had also become much more honest. So far, no one really went to crusade against it. Even Whiterun City, which was defeated because of it, later benefited because of it. The future was so unpredictable. Whiterun City was defeated because of the migration of the ancient red dragon, but because of the pressure of the ancient red dragon, the impact of the Avatar crisis on Whiterun City was even smaller. Monsters were smart. Demons were also smart. Devils were very smart. With an ancient red dragon nearby, smart people wouldn't cause trouble here, and unintelligent monsters would have been scared away by the red dragon's aura. Soren's destination was the ghost forest. The God of Mages finally disappeared in this place, and his disappearance and fall were closely related to another god. God of Lich, Vishalan. Chapter 955. The God of Lich, Visharan. He was a vain, selfish, narrow-minded, shrewd god who was obsessed with all kinds of experiments of life and death. He was indifferent to the fate of those lower creatures. In many ways, his way of doing things was not far from that of mortals, but now he had much more power to command. When Visharan was still a mortal, he was a red-robed wizard who had defected and was one of the main enemies of Szazden. Later, he was guided by the Lord of Storms during his research and became a god according to the method taught by the Lord of Storms. But he soon understood that the Lord of Storms just wanted to create a servant that could be used. For this reason, he asked for help from the God of Mages, Ares, and formed an alliance. He also used the help of the goddess of magic to stop Talos' revenge. However, he later reconciled with Talos privately and re-allied with him. He also began to show goodwill to the Lady of the Night, Shar. But until the outbreak of the Avatar crisis, he was still serving the God of Mages, Ares. The God of Lich was a typical example of a mortal becoming a god. And the way he was created as a god was the same as the way Soren created a god by giving divinity and divinity. At that time, the Lord of Storms wanted to create a servant that he could use, but he didn't expect the god of Lich to be more cunning than he thought. Relying on various interests and hypocrisy, the god of Lich escaped the wrath of all sides and finally served the god of mages in name. Ghost Forest. This was a cursed land. It used to be an ancient battlefield during the time of Queen Isabella. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers died here. Later, it was used by a powerful Lich to try to create a terrible army of the dead. But later, a group of heroes thwarted the Lich's conspiracy, but the aura of the dead still polluted the environment. The Droll Order tried to purify this land. They planted many trees here, but in the end, these trees were also polluted. These became a country of scavengers, and there was a special creature. Ghost Spider. A kind of half-dead spider, formerly a servant cultivated by the Queen of Spiders, Lolth, and then quickly multiplied and grew here. Several figures leaped between the trees covered with spider webs. All of a sudden, a shadow descended from the sky and knocked down all of these figures at lightning speed. Soren's figure appeared on the tree trunk. He frowned as he stared at the three figures in front of him. Looking at their dark skin, he couldn't help but frown. Drow. And it was a female drow. Due to the uniqueness of the Underdark, female drows had a very high status within their race. This status allowed them to hold more power. Two of the three drows in front of Soren wore special rings with the emblem of the Queen of Spiders, Lolth. There are actually two priests. Soren landed on the ground and turned over the female drow in front of him. He had been merciful just now and did not kill these people directly. He murmured, "There's even one of them who's at the level of a bishop. Is the Queen of Spiders doing something here?" Snake head whip, emblem ring, summoning wax demon. The older drow priest was obviously a core member of the Church of the Queen of Spiders. Huh. Soren searched the bodies of the three female drows and found a scroll that was a little special. There was a very strange thing drawn on it. A scepter. Soren frowned and thought for a moment, then said to himself, "The scepter of Savras?" Things were not simple. This was because another god was involved in this matter. The god of prophecy, Savras. A long time ago, Savras was the patron saint of the southern spellcasters. His clergy was the same as that of Ares, who was still serving Mistra as a mage at that time. Before the Calamity of Dawn, the two of them fought, but Savras lost, although his church claimed that it was because he saw the future and deliberately did so. Atlas had seized a portion of Savola's divine domain and became the only guardian god of mages. Meanwhile, Savola's essence was imprisoned in a staff that Atlas had crafted. Savras was later released by Ares after making an oath of loyalty, but in fact, most of his divinity and power were still imprisoned in the scepter. Although Savras was very dissatisfied with his position. On the surface, he still served Ares. The battle between gods was very cruel. Especially when it involved the same clergy. At that time, Ares, who had the help of the goddess of magic, won, so Savras was imprisoned and seized the clergy of mages. Then, he was sealed in the scepter as a servant and became a subordinate god under Ares. Soren found the pattern of the scepter of Savras on the drow priest. A god imprisoned by Ares, who still held the clergy of prophecy, fate, and truth. The god of mages is dead. Soren put away the scroll and murmured, "Why is the drow looking for the scepter of Savras? Does the Queen of Spiders, Lolth, want to control the god of prophecy?" Legend. It was just a legend. The body of the god of prophecy, Savras, was imprisoned in the scepter, and the one who owned the scepter could command and control him. Of course. At present, this legend had not been confirmed, because until the fall of the god of mages, this scepter was personally carried by Ares. Prophecy, fate, truth. A glimmer of light appeared in Soren's eyes, and he murmured, "Although the god of prophecy is only a weak god, the clergy in charge is really good. Any action of the Queen of Spiders must be up to something." Soren thought for a moment, woke up one of the drow, and then cast a mind control spell. Soon. The purpose of their trip was asked by Soren. These female drow were indeed looking for the scepter of Savras, but what made Soren a little dissatisfied was that their ultimate goal was unknown. They only received a mission from the church, but no one knew what the Queen of Spiders wanted to do. Soren stood in place and thought. He knocked out the priests in front of him, then opened a portal and sent them to the city of Moder. These people were not easy to deal with. First of all, Soren could not kill them because they were the priests of the Queen of Spiders. If they died, they must return to the kingdom of God. In other words, the Queen of Spiders could learn of Soren's existence through their death. Then, even if he killed them and erased the traces of their souls, the Queen of Spiders would still sense it. At that time, Soren would still be exposed. Therefore, the best way at present was to keep these priests alive, and when they were alive, they could not pray and contact the Queen of Spiders. Soren had to keep them unconscious until the end of his operation, and then they would be useless. The god of prophecy. The god of liches. Soren's figure moved to the other side of the ghost forest, and he murmured, "Both of the gods of the god of mages have appeared. The former is imprisoned in the scepter. And the latter is simply a fence-sitter, related to the god of storm, and secretly serves the Lady of Night. It seems that the fall of the god of mages is not that simple." The struggle between the gods broke out. The god of liches served the god of mages, and the god of mages served the goddess of magic. The goddess of magic was an ally of the Lady of Silvermoon. The god of liches secretly allied with the god of storm, and also served the Lady of Night. This fence-sitter had connections with both sides. Under such circumstances, the sudden fall of the god of mages, no one could help but suspect the Lady of Night and the god of storm, who was related to the god of liches. Today, Soren also met the priests of the Queen of Spiders, so he had reason to believe that this matter was related to the Queen of Spiders. The Lady of Night was in charge of the shadow weave. For this ancient goddess, the power and priesthood of the god of mages was also attractive, and it could greatly weaken the power of the goddess of magic. Night fell. Soren quickly arrived at the place where the god of mages met with the accident. It had already turned into a huge crater. Meteorite? Soren saw at a glance that a legendary spell had been used here, and there were dense corpses of ghost spiders nearby. At the same time, Soren also found a broken body that looked like a spider, but part of the body was that of a drow. Spider sprite. In order to punish some people, the Queen of Spiders used cruel means to curse them, and then a kind of twisted monster was born. That was the spider sprite. They were the claws and teeth of the Queen of Spiders. Near the battlefield, Soren saw the corpse of the spider sprite. There was no doubt that the Queen of Spiders was related to the fall of the god of mages. The priesthood of tracking. Soren activated the power of the tracking priesthood, and some broken fragments appeared in front of his eyes. The power of another god interfered with his tracking, so the images he saw were very broken. He could only look for clues in places that were not interfered with by the power of the divinity. A god stronger than me has joined the battle. Soren stood in place and thought for a moment, then murmured, "It seems impossible to track the god of mages. It has been interfered with by some kind of power. However, maybe I can track the god of lich and the god of prophecy." He did as he said. Soren quickly changed his target. He did not get many clues about the god of lich, but when Soren locked onto the god of prophecy, a strange scepter appeared in front of his eyes. The scepter of Savras. The sealed body of the god of prophecy, the scepter that had always been controlled by the god of mages. Soren actually found some clues about it. The scepter was taken away by someone. And, most importantly, the one who took the scepter away was only a powerful mortal, so he could not use the power of the divinity to interfere with Soren's tracking. Chapter 956. Soren's figure quickly followed the tracks. After about 10 kilometers into the ghost forest, Soren's figure couldn't help but stop. The tracks here were a lot denser, and there were many other footprints, which meant that someone had already caught up to Soren. It was very likely that they were the first to arrive near the battlefield, because there were a lot of footprints and they were very light. Most importantly, Soren found traces of fighting and struggle nearby. Did I get caught? Soren couldn't help but frown when he thought of this, but he quickly realized that this wasn't the case. These traces of fighting were left behind by someone else. A strange and gloomy aura quickly approached Soren, and a huge monster quickly approached within Soren's perception range, but it didn't make any sound. The spider webs around it were a lot denser. Soren seemed to have thought of something, and muttered, "Mother Ghost Spider? This thing is quite smart, it actually knew to lure the enemy to the territory of a wild boss." Mother Ghost Spider. It was a very famous wild boss near Whiterun. There had been many adventurers who had tried to level it, but in the end, they had all failed. This was because the Mother Ghost Spider's monster level was 27, and its challenge rating was close to 24. It was a huge half-undead creature that could directly trigger the immunity test with its eyes, and it could continuously cast the Finger of Death spell. The shadow that was quickly approaching Soren was the Mother Ghost Spider. When the huge shadow fell, a huge spider with a diameter of 6 or 7 meters with 12 legs and 8 eyes appeared in front of Soren. It seemed to be a little uneasy. As a powerful beast, it wasn't very smart, but even if Soren didn't show the power of a god, it still felt a deep sense of threat. But even so, a little bit of divinity was very attractive to it, and it was very eager to absorb the power of divinity, so it attacked purely on instinct. A silver-white stream of light appeared. Soren's figure disappeared, and in the next moment, 2 figures of Soren appeared in front of him, one on the left and one on the right. Shadow, domain. Death, domain. Soren's silhouette turned into a silver-white stream of light and slashed at the Mother Ghost Spirit Spider's body. The Mother Ghost Spirit Spider let out a painful howl. The divine weapon easily broke through its defense and caused great damage to it. The entire battle did not last long. This was because the Mother Ghost Spider's injuries were increasing at an alarming rate when it was facing the attacks of 2 Soren at the same time. It tried to kill Soren with its death trigger ability, but due to the activation of the death domain, its ability was completely suppressed. Soren could not trigger any test of death at all. Soren stabbed the divine weapon into the back of the enemy's head with a strange silver light. Then, a string of data appeared: killed wild leader, Mother of Ghost Spirit Spider. Extracting target's soul energy. You've gained 105000 slaughter EXP. Target has divinity. Extracting the target's divinity. You have gained 1 divinity point. With the death of the Mother Ghost Spirit Spider, the participating souls were bound by the domain, and then a gray-white soul crystal appeared. This was a legendary soul of the undead. There were not many valuable things on the Mother Ghost Spirit Spider. Soren only used it to cut off its eyes, and then quickly approached its cave. Sure enough, Soren found a lot of corpses here. Humans? And drows? Soren saw the bones of humans and drows that were eaten. From the shape of the bones, he could easily tell that they were of different races. There were also scattered weapons nearby. It was obvious that these pursuers had fought back when they encountered the Mother Ghost Spirit Spider. Although the Mother Ghost Spirit Spider could not last a quarter of an hour in front of Soren, it was still an advanced legendary boss in the wild. It had no problem facing a team of legends, so it was naturally very easy to kill these pursuers. The person who obtained the Scepter of Sovras was very smart. He deliberately led them here to ask them for help. He should have something very important on him. Soren observed the traces in the Mother Ghost Spirit Spider's nest. Everything told him a very important point. That was, the target had also entered the Mother Ghost Spirit Spider's territory, and had also moved around its nest. But the Mother Ghost Spirit Spider did not attack him. It seemed that it did not find any trace of this person at all. What's going on? Soren looked at these deliberately left traces and could not help but fall into deep thought. He murmured, the Mother Ghost Spirit Spider is a half-undead creature. Ordinary stealth and invisibility spells are useless against it, not to mention it has the ability to communicate telepathically. To be able to enter the mother ghost spirit spider's nest and not be attacked, either this guy has some special ability, or he has a very powerful special item. Soren pondered for a moment. Then he continued to follow the traces. The speed of this target was not fast. It seemed that this person was a spellcaster, and in order to avoid being tracked, he did not even use fly and teleport spells. Fly was too easy to be exposed, and if there was no safe destination for teleport spells, then it was also very easy to be exposed and be tracked by deity-level enemies. This person was a veteran. Moreover, he was a very powerful legendary veteran. Soren continued to follow the traces left by the target, but the more he went, the more surprised his face became. This guy was a monster. This was because Soren had already killed the third wild commander boss in order to track his traces. The first one was the mother ghost spirit spider. The second one was Morgan the Witherer. Fallen corrupted Treants. The third one was Furor the Rager. Bugbear Goblin Leader. This guy seemed to have swaggered around the Whiterun commander bosses in the vicinity of Whiterun. There were traces left behind by him, but there were no signs of any commander bosses attacking him. This was simply unbelievable. Soren killed 3 legendary wild bosses in one go, but without exception, he found that although the target he was tracking encountered these enemies, there was no battle. What does this guy have on him? Could it be the power of the Scepter of Savras? That shouldn't be. I've never heard of the Scepter of Savras having such an ability. Soren fell into silence. Even in his memory, there were not many things that could do this. The target he was tracking now undoubtedly had a very important item on him, and it might even be another powerful divine artifact. Otherwise, there was no way to explain this phenomenon. This was a very troublesome problem. This was because if Soren did not have the tracking divinity, he would not have been able to find this target. And the strange item on him was very likely to cause some trouble for Soren. The next morning, Soren followed the traces and circled around Whiterun. Finally, he locked onto the target's final destination. The ancient red dragon. All the traces pointed to the mountain range where the ancient red dragon was. Unlike the previous traces, the target here had created a false impression. The first trace was easy to follow. Even a legendary level ranger could do it. The target was in the direction of the ruins of Silvery Moon. It started from the vicinity of Whiterun and passed by a city controlled by the Church of the Goddess of Magic. This false impression had deceived many people. Basically, all the pursuers followed this false impression to the city controlled by the Church of the Goddess of Magic. The second trace that was deliberately covered up pointed to the ancient red dragon. This guy did not leave the vicinity of Whiterun at all. Instead, after leaving for some distance, he suddenly disappeared. When the trace reappeared, he was already in the direction of the Red Dragon Mountains. After getting the Scepter of Savras, he did not want to hand it over to the Church of the Goddess of Magic. Instead, he led the pursuers to the Church of the Goddess of Magic. Who is this guy? Soren followed the traces and quickly approached the Red Dragon Mountains. Does he want to keep this divine artifact for himself? That's right. The Scepter of Savras sealed the body of a true god. If I can extract the power from it, it won't be difficult for a mortal to ascend to godhood. Ascend to godhood. It was a temptation that a mortal could not resist. In the end, the target brought the Scepter of Savras into the territory of the ancient Red Dragon. So the most dangerous place is the safest place? A plane appeared in front of Soren's eyes. This was the place where he first joined the army. It was a battle against the ogres. After passing through here, he would enter the territory of the ancient Red Dragon. It enslaved a large number of servants and built its own dragon nest deep in the mountains. Such a place was very dangerous. A chaotic and evil ancient red dragon was not very friendly to any creature. The target chose to hide here. Either he doesn't care about the threat of the ancient red dragon at all, or he doesn't care about being discovered by the ancient red dragon at all. It seems the latter is more likely. An ancient red dragon was enough to threaten a god in the form of a saint. Basically, no mortal could fight against it alone, so it was impossible that he did not care about the threat of the ancient red dragon. The biggest possibility was that the target had a way to avoid the ancient red dragon and could hide here without worrying about being discovered by the enemy. If that was the case, it was reasonable to choose the territory of the ancient red dragon. Because during the Avatar crisis, no one would easily provoke an ancient red dragon. Even if it had amazing treasures, there was no reason for the gods to attack it. Even if there was only a 90% chance of winning. The gods were not willing to take the risk to slay the dragon and then gain some wealth that only mortals cared about. This was the best place to hide. As long as he was not discovered, with the ancient red dragon attracting the attention of the enemy, no one would think that the person who obtained the scepter of Savras was hiding here. This was a very smart guy. P.S. Grandma can get out of bed and walk now. I love you guys. Moi. Chapter 957. Soren moved forward along the mountain range. After entering the red dragon's territory, he could clearly feel that the number of monsters had increased. Generally, when an old dragon built its nest, a colossal dragon would recruit monsters to guard its nest, and an ancient dragon would control even more minions. Soren saw ogres the most. Even though they had been defeated by Whiterun's army once, the chaotic and evil ogres and red dragons still gathered together. In addition, there were also gnolls, bugbears, dark creatures, and so on. They were all entrenched in the path leading to the red dragon's lair. They were responsible for preventing others from approaching. Whiterun's army had returned empty-handed because of this, and they had only seen the ancient red dragon a few times. More obvious traces began to appear in Soren's line of sight. Not only had the target entered the ancient red dragon's territory, but he had also gone deep into the mountain range. None of the monsters along the way had discovered his existence. Soren had the shadow clergy, and his stealth ability was frighteningly high. It was normal for him not to be discovered by monsters. However, this guy was obviously not a rogue. It was a bit illogical for him to be able to avoid so many monsters. After moving forward for about 10 kilometers, Li Yunmu's group suddenly stopped moving. Soren found traces of a battle for the first time, although the battle had ended quickly. This is Melf's acid arrow? Soren leaned over and looked at the corpse in front of him, as well as the corpses of the bugbears. The whole battle ended quickly. It seemed that the target had accidentally encountered a group of bugbears, and there were traces of a bonfire next to him. According to Soren's guess, the target must have set up a bonfire at night, and then suddenly encountered the wandering bugbears. This time, he was discovered by the enemy. Soren suspected that he did not use any of his items at that time. It looks like he was attacked while camping. His spellcasting level is not low. All the bugbears were killed by a single spell. The enemy's spellcasting speed is very fast. Soren looked at these traces and fell into deep thought. According to the feedback from the tracking clergy, the battle should have started last night. In other words, the target had let down his guard after entering the mountain range, and had even chosen to set up camp in a tent, which wasn't too far away from Soren. However, after this battle, he should be a lot more cautious. Soren decided to chase after him. When night fell, he could already feel that he was very close to his target. However, Soren didn't find him. He only followed the trail and found some clues. The monsters in the area became denser. They were all creatures enslaved by the ancient dragon. There were even Taurens in the Underdark nearby. Soren bent down and looked at the rock in front of him, then muttered, "It's around here." Has the target gone up the mountain? Go up the mountain? In front of him was a towering mountain peak. At the top of the mountain was a half-activated volcano. This was man-made. The ancient red dragon had transformed this place into a volcano that had yet to erupt with the help of the elemental turbulence in order to create a suitable lair for itself. As Soren approached the mountain, the number of monsters decreased significantly. He actually hid under the ancient red dragon's lair. This guy really has some guts. Soren followed the trail and soon saw a cave. It was dark inside, but it didn't affect Soren's dark vision. He carefully entered the cave. Then, something inconceivable happened. Soren felt the presence of a human, but he couldn't see him at all. It was like Soren wearing an anti-detection cloak. No shadow could hide in front of Soren, who had the shadow clergy. The invisible state of the target seemed to be caused by some kind of divine artifact. There was a very faint sound of breathing in the cave. It seemed that the target was very tired after running for so long. There was a security trap at the entrance of the cave, but it wasn't a problem for Soren at all. There was a magic circle set up in the cave. The target was lying on a long rock in front of him. This should have been the bear's lair. Time stop. Legendary spell. Soren couldn't see the target, which made him even more cautious. In order to make sure that there were no accidents, he directly cast a legendary spell, Time Stop. Everything was frozen. Soren's figure quickly approached and then rushed toward the target. Mortals couldn't be immune to Time Stop, which was one of the advantages that gods had against legendary spellcasters. An invisible energy barrier appeared. There were several defensive items on the target's body, and almost all of them were automatically activated at the moment of being attacked by Soren. Simulacrum. Two figures of Soren appeared, and in an instant, the silver light of his sword turned into a curtain, and in the blink of an eye, the opponent's energy barrier was broken. Then, Soren pressed down on the target that he could touch but couldn't see at all. Blood splattered. Soren slashed at the opponent, and then felt the staff in the opponent's hand. Almost without thinking, he cut off the target's arm, and then the staff fell into Soren's hand. A figure appeared. The effect of Time Stop was still there. After Soren took the staff, a guy who looked a little embarrassed but familiar appeared in front of him. Ildes. According to the original historical track, he inherited part of the divine power of the goddess of magic. This lucky guy should have become the new god of mages in the original history, but because of Soren took the initiative to help the goddess of magic in the misty forest, so Ildes lost a very important opportunity. However, as one of the best among the natives, he still got another adventure, and that was, Ildes successfully found the legendary Archmage staff. After seeing the staff in his hand, Soren immediately knew why Ildes could take the staff of Savras and escape from so many people. There was no mercy at all. Soren directly killed Ildes in front of him because the effect of the Time Stop spell was about to end, and the target was a legendary mage. At the same time, Savra's scepter was still on him. Soren absolutely did not allow any accidents to happen. Death came. A soul appeared in Soren's divine sense. Soul imprisonment. Why didn't he leave him alive for interrogation? This was what Soren relied on. As a god, he had the ability to imprison souls, and it was obviously much safer to interrogate a dead enemy. A little bit of divine light appeared. To Soren's surprise, when he killed Ildes, a data prompt appeared, Archmage, Ildes killed. Extracting target's soul energy. Target's soul is imprisoned. You've gained 250,000 slaughter EXP. Target has divinity. Extracting target's divinity. You've gained 5 divinity. Target has divinity. Extracting target's divinity. You've gained 3 divinity. Target has a domain of divinity. Extracting target's divinity. Compatibility 85%. You've gained some information about the divinity of mage. Divinity fusion. You've mastered the domain of mage. You've gained some information about the divinity of mage. The golden light of divinity appeared. Soren was right, Ildes had inherited some of the power of the god of mages. It seemed that his decision to kill the target directly was very correct. Because Ildes was only a mortal, he still couldn't fully grasp the power of the god of mages. If he was given a little more time and the power of Sarfla's scepter, Ildes would soon be able to ascend to godhood. What a lucky guy. Soren muttered to himself as he stared at the corpse in front of him. Although he changed history, Ildes was obviously a person favored by luck. If he could obtain the power of the god of mages, if he did not meet Soren, it would not be difficult for him to become a god as a mortal. Soon, the scepter of Savras was found by Sauron. However, his attention was mainly on the first staff, and that was the legendary Staff of the Archmage. What a surprise! This divine staff actually had the aura of the divine son of Massacre, and there was a remnant of the divine power of Massacre. This meant that it had been used by the divine son of Massacre and killed a large number of enemies. Item type: Staff of the Archmage. Item grade: Level 5 Divine Artifact. Item description: this is a legendary divine artifact. It has a very strong power. Every time it appears, there will be a bloody storm in the material plane. The divine son of Massacre once used this weapon and used it to kill the final enemy of the War of the Gods. This weapon has been stained with the blood of God, and there is a remnant of the aura of Massacre on it. Equipment requirement: Spellcaster. Equipment effect: Divine Artifact, Blood of God, Greater Dispel Magic, Succubus Immunity, Immunity to Enhancement, Protection from Evil, Protection from Energy, Spell Storage, Permanent Invisibility. Weapon effect: Divine Artifact. This weapon is a legendary divine artifact. It cannot be destroyed by conventional means, and it is also immune to disintegration spells. Only legendary disintegration spells have a 1% chance of destroying this divine artifact, but the one who destroys it must also receive a backlash from the divine power. Weapon effect: Blood of God. This weapon has been soaked in the blood of countless high-level demons, demigods, false gods, and even real gods. Some powerful beings who once coveted the divine power of Massacre have also died in its hands. Weapon effect: Greater Dispel Magic. When this weapon hits the target, it will automatically cast a legendary Dispel Magic and automatically remove the defensive spells on the target. Weapon effect: Immunity to Charm. When this divine artifact is held, it will automatically be immune to all charm spells. Weapon effect: Protection from Evil. When this divine artifact is activated, it will automatically cast a Protection from Evil spell. Weapon effect: Immunity to Enhancement. When this divine artifact is held, all immunity resistance +2. Weapon effect: Energy Protection. When this divine artifact is activated, it will automatically activate an energy protection field. Weapon effect: Spell Storage. This divine artifact is stored with the legendary spell Trap, Chain Lightning, 2 times, Lightning, 4 times, Fireball, 6 times. This divine artifact will automatically recharge itself every day. Weapon effect: Permanent Invisibility. When this divine artifact is activated, it will enter a state of invisibility. The state of invisibility has no cooldown, and it will remain in effect forever unless it is removed by the user. The Archmage Staff. If there was a divine artifact in the material plane that could be compared to the Holy Avenger, it would undoubtedly be the Archmage Staff. It was a divine artifact that would automatically cast a Greater Dispel Magic when it hits the target. Sauron finally understood why Ildes could avoid so many wild bosses. It was because these enemies could not see him at all. Chapter 958. The Archmage Staff was a famous artifact. Its most powerful ability was that it could be used together with the anti-detection cloak. It could become invisible at any time and anywhere, and it could not be seen by magic or the naked eye. This artifact used to be Sauron's favorite item, but after he mastered the Shadow Priesthood, his need for the Archmage Staff had decreased a lot. However, this artifact still had a lot of uses. Even if Sauron could not use it, it was still an invaluable treasure for any mortal. Ildes had a lot of good things on him. However, most of them were not of much value to Sauron. The only thing that piqued his interest was the 2 staffs. The first was the Archmage Staff. The second was the Sarfla's Scepter. Compared to the Archmage Staff, the Sarfla's Scepter looked much more mysterious. The Sarfla's Scepter was carved out of grey wood, about 4 feet long, and inlaid with 9 starblue gems. A diamond with a diameter of 1 inch with the emblem of Sarflas the All-Seeing was embedded at the bottom of the scepter. Another diamond with a diameter of 3 inches with 1,000 facets on it could not be made by mortals. Finally, a diamond with the emblem of the god of mages, Azuz, was embedded at the top of the scepter. When Soren received the scepter, he could not identify its attributes. The Sarfla's scepter was covered with divine power. It was not only the power of the sealed Sarflas the all-seeing, but also the power of the god of mages, Azuz. The power of the priesthood of mages has been transferred to the scepter? Soren clenched the Sarfla's scepter in his hand and murmured, no wonder Ildes was willing to betray the church of the goddess of magic to take him away. Ildes wanted to become a god. He also wanted to obtain the power of the priesthood of mages. That was why he took the risk and escaped to the Red Dragon Mountains with the scepter. Saint form. In order to explore the mystery of the fall of the god of mages, Soren penetrated the scepter with his god-level perception. He wanted to know if Azuz's soul was hidden in it. However, what surprised Soren was that Azutha's soul wasn't among them. It looked like he had really fallen. What he sensed was a tortured soul. It was none other than the prophet, Savras. This soul was very weak, and its consciousness was rather blurry. It seemed that a lot of its power had been extracted. The Red Dragon Mountain Range was not a place to stay for long. Soren imprisoned Ildes's soul and opened the portal with the 2 staffs and the lute. He was ready to return to Motor City. But at this moment, an angry roar suddenly rang out. Immediately after, an astonishing dragon's aura shrouded down from the top of the mountain. Accompanied by a raging gust of wind, a huge monster descended from the sky and landed outside the cave. Who is it? Which lowly insect dares to sneak into the lair of the ancient red dragon, Frostra? The dull dragon's voice was filled with boundless anger. A huge dragon head appeared outside the cave. The terrible dragon's aura made all the nearby creatures not dare to approach it easily. A burning flame appeared in front of Soren's eyes. It seemed that as long as Soren's answer was not satisfied, the red dragon in front of him would burn him to ashes with its terrible dragon breath. He was too careless. Soren had just killed Ildes. For a moment, he forgot the existence of the ancient red dragon, and he even forgot that he was under its lair. Ancient dragons were all very cautious. They had rich life experience. Under normal circumstances, the lair of an ancient dragon was many times more dangerous than that of an adult dragon. This was because they would fill their lair with all kinds of magic traps and warning spells over a long period of time. Ildes sneaked all the way here without using a teleportation spell. This was because the ancient red dragon's lair could sense the teleportation spell's mark near it. This was very likely to expose its existence. Soren was in a hurry to return to Motor City after killing Ildes. He forgot about this ancient red dragon for a moment. Just when he was casting a greater teleportation spell, the power of the spell alarmed the ancient red dragon. The surrounding space was sealed. The cunning ancient red dragon immediately cast dimensional anchor to lock the space. Soren could not leave unless he mobilized the power of divinity. However, at this time, Soren was not so afraid of an ancient red dragon. His figure slowly walked out of the cave. After seeing the staff in his hand, the ancient red dragon's eyes burst into a dazzling light in an instant. It said in a deep voice, "Human. Give me the staff in your hand. The great Frostra will forgive you for offending me." The light of greed appeared. Even an idiot could see that the staff in Soren's hand was not ordinary. Not to mention, with the knowledge of an ancient red dragon, it was not difficult for it to recognize the scepter of Savras. Don't let greed blind your eyes. Soren's mouth showed a mocking smile. He slowly stood in front of the huge ancient red dragon and said calmly, "Look at who I am first." At this time, the ancient red dragon looked away from the artifact with difficulty, and then it looked at Soren in front of it and reached out its hand. The next moment, the ancient red dragon Frostra's huge body trembled, and then its head immediately lowered. There was a trace of fear in its voice. "Shadow Lord, Soren. Frostra doesn't know you're coming. Please forgive me for offending you just now. You can leave here at any time." The glory of the gods could not be hidden from the ancient red dragon. In particular, Soren did not hide his power, so when the ancient red dragon saw his holy form, it immediately knew his identity. Then, fear was born uncontrollably. Soren stroked the scepter of Savras in his hand, narrowed his eyes slightly and looked at the ancient red dragon in front of him. He smiled and said, "It seems that there is a price to pay for offending you. Then, if you offend me, what price should you pay? Shadow, realm. Death, realm. Slaughter, realm." The power of the three realms shrouded the nearby space and blocked all the escape routes of the ancient red dragon in an instant. Soren slowly took a step forward and said with a chuckle, "How should I punish you? You should know that the price of offending a god is not light." Cold sweat appeared. The ancient red dragon in front of him could not help but take a step back. Its voice was no longer as strong as before. It whispered, "Great Shadow Lord, I am willing to compensate you for the offense just now. Look. This is mithril from the Underdark. This is a gem from the Southern Islands. I am willing to give it all to you." There was a hint of pain on the ancient red dragon's face, but it still opened a space portal, and then took out a large piece of mithril and hundreds of gems. For the dragons, being willing to take out their own treasures as an apology was already a great concession. After all, they were all misers. Soren accepted it without hesitation. As Soren accepted these things, the ancient red dragon's face also showed a hint of relief, because this meant that Soren accepted its apology. If Soren did not take these things, it was afraid that it would be ready to fight immediately. Because no one could offend the majesty of a god and not pay the price. If Soren did not accept these things, it meant that the price it paid was not serious enough. The true god in front of it intended to make it pay a more painful price. P.S. First update. There is another chapter today. Chapter 959. That was the rule. A god was not a benevolent being, especially an evil god. Soren looked at the ancient red dragon in front of him. There was still a trace of uneasiness in his eyes, and then he slowly said, "I also need some dragon blood." Dragon blood? Facing Soren's request, the ancient red dragon did not hesitate to cut open its forelimbs with its extremely sharp dragon claws. Then a large amount of dragon blood gushed out. It collected it with magic and then respectfully sent it to Soren. After offering a large amount of dragon blood with both hands, the ancient red dragon's expression became much more relaxed. Because it was normal to offend an evil god with blood as the price. It had just offered an apology, but that was only its will. Whether the evil god was satisfied with it was another matter. But Soren asked for dragon blood, which meant that he was willing to let go of the ancient red dragon in front of him. Offering treasures and dragon blood. In the ancient red dragon's view, Soren's request was very reasonable. It was very consistent with the identity of an evil god, and it was secretly relieved. For an ancient red dragon that weighed more than 50 tons, a little bit of dragon blood was nothing. The price of angering a mid-level divine evil god was something it could not bear. Soren waved his hand and put away the dragon blood. It was not the time to kill an ancient red dragon. Soren was 90% sure that he could defeat the ancient red dragon, but he was not 100% sure that he could stop the ancient red dragon from escaping. Because dragons could fly, and even a true god might not be able to stop them in the sky. Soren sealed the teleportation spell, but he could not seal the ancient red dragon's ability to fly. If the ancient red dragon ran away after attacking, then Soren would not be afraid. But if the ancient red dragon took revenge on Mordor City, it would definitely be a very troublesome thing. So either he didn't attack, or he had to be 100% sure that he could kill the ancient red dragon. The light of the teleportation spell appeared again. When Soren's figure entered the portal, the ancient red dragon carefully let out a sigh of relief. For the turbulent period of the Avatar crisis, even a powerful ancient red dragon had to shrink its tail and behave, because God knew when it would be unlucky enough to meet a true god walking in the mortal world. Mordor City. After returning to Mordor City, Soren immediately found Gloria. Recently, she had been living in the Arcane Tower. When Gloria saw Soren, she couldn't help but be surprised. When she saw the scepter in Soren's hand, she was even more surprised. The scepter of Savras? Gloria couldn't help but murmur. Soren nodded and handed over the scepter in his hand. He said softly, "The prophet, Savras. Let's see if it's suitable." No one was more suitable for this scepter than Gloria because she was a legendary witch with the ability of divination. Facing Soren's scepter, Gloria hesitated for a moment, but after seeing Soren's determined eyes, she slowly held the scepter. A little bit of golden light emerged. The moment Gloria held the scepter of Savras, the golden light of divinity emerged. The power from the prophet, Savras, was absorbed by her and integrated into her body. This meant that Gloria herself was extremely compatible with the clergy of prophecy, wizard, truth, and fate. Especially the clergy of prophecy, her compatibility was quite high. This phenomenon didn't appear on Soren because he only had a little compatibility with the clergy of wizard. The light of divinity shrouded Gloria. Her figure flew up automatically, and along with the light of divinity, Gloria's original silver-white hair gradually disappeared and turned into soft black hair again. The clergy of prophecy. The power from the scepter of Savras began to transfer into Gloria's body. This was the greatest benefit of the Avatar crisis, that was, it was easier for mortals to absorb divinity. How do you feel? When the light of divinity dissipated, the Gloria in front of him was completely different. There was an additional golden light in her beautiful eyes, which meant that she had become a demigod, and it was easier for her to advance than Vivian. The clergy of prophecy was completely prepared for her. Whether it was strength or expertise, Gloria was extremely compatible with it. I saw something beyond the prophecy. A smile appeared on Gloria's face. She gently lifted the long hair hanging by her ear and said softly, "It's a wonderful feeling. I've never encountered such a situation before. Even if I didn't cast any spells, I could vaguely feel some things that would happen in the future." Soren nodded and waved his hand to stop Gloria from saying anything. He said seriously, "No matter what you see, don't tell me. The future is always changing. The fate you can see is just a branch of it. What you need to do now is to familiarize yourself with the power of divinity. As a new demigod, you must learn to control this power, not be controlled by it. Also, be careful of Sarflas in the scepter. Although I've sealed his consciousness, he's still alive. Although I have sealed his consciousness, you must be careful not to be influenced by him." Soren sealed Savras. That was why Gloria could so easily obtain the clergy of prophecy. However, he couldn't completely eliminate him because Gloria still needed to take the clergy of truth, fate, and mage from him. Azuz fell. A part of the clergy of mage returned to Savras. Gloria could not only have prophecy, but also the other clergies. However, if Gloria accepted these clergies, then her relationship with the goddess of magic would be very delicate. She was Soren's woman, so it was impossible for her to become a subordinate of the goddess of magic. This was something that had to be faced in the future, but there was no rush to deal with it now. After handing the scepter of Savras to Gloria, Soren came to the fallen witch's laboratory. The divine light just now could not be hidden from her. Obviously, the fallen witch already knew what Soren brought back. "Did you prepare something good for me?" After seeing Soren's figure, the fallen witch couldn't help but lift her long hair and smile. She said charmingly, "Don't forget that I'm also proficient in prophecy. I can feel that you've brought me something extraordinary." Solen smiled when he heard this. There was no need to be so polite to the fallen witch. He directly took out the archmage staff and handed it to her. He said in a deep voice, "You still want to go to the sigil, right?" The fallen witch nodded and said softly, "If I want to build a real floating city, I have to go to the sigil." Soren also understood this point. He took off his cloak and handed it to her. He said, "This is the archmage staff. It has the ability to permanently turn you invisible. This is the anti-detection cloak. No spell can detect your invisibility when you wear it." "I'm sorry." As a god, I can't enter the sigil. So I can only find these two things for you. You must be careful when you go to the sigil. If you encounter any danger that you can't deal with, use these two things to come back first. The floating city is not as important as you. The Archmage staff. The anti-detection cloak. This was a pair of divine artifacts. After wearing it, unless the enemy had the eye of truth, they would not be able to detect the existence of the fallen witch. Facing the two divine artifacts that Soren handed over, the fallen witch was silent for a while. Then, she took them. But just as Soren was about to turn around and leave, she suddenly walked up to Soren and hugged him. She gave him a big kiss. It seemed that at this moment, she didn't want to hide her thoughts at all. She didn't even care that Gloria could sense everything. She just hugged Soren and kissed him fiercely. And then, there was no more and then. P.S. Second update. Something happened 2 days ago. I'm tired and a little uncomfortable. Tomorrow will be the second update. Chapter 960. Sigil City was a very dangerous place. However, such an important place was very special. The Lady of Pain who managed Sigil City was very unfriendly to the gods. This unfriendliness was directed at all the gods, and there was no difference in treatment. Whether it was an evil god or a good god, whether it was from Mountain Paradise or the Bator Inferno, all the gods were treated the same in the eyes of the Lady of Pain. That was, she did not care about you at all. Sigil City was an absolute territory controlled by the Lady of Pain. Although her power was not the strongest in the multiverse, she was always the strongest in Sigil City. There was a passage about the Lady of Pain in Sigil City. The Lady of Pain is a symbol of power. People usually call her the Lady. She has no residence, no temple, no palace, and no believers, worshippers. Those who pray to her foolishly, prepare to regret it. Because the Lady of Pain will mercilessly kill anyone who worships and believes in her. Sometimes, people can see her floating on the streets, her clothes barely touching the ground. However, even if she visits Sigil City sometimes, it does not mean that you can go up and talk to her. She never talks, and those fools who dare to go up are usually hurt by her gaze. The residents of Sigil City look at her with respect, because she is the protector of Sigil City. The Lady of Pain has the right to open and close portals in Sigil City. In a neutral place like Sigil City, portals to other worlds are everywhere, and people have to find them. Everyone would arrive at Sigil City in some way when they traveled through the various planes. However, other forces are not allowed to enter the cage of Sigil City, and these forces are mainly the other gods. All the doors are closed to them. Because of this, the other gods feel very discouraged, and they need to gain more believers, but the Lady of Pain stopped them. First of all, one thing was certain. Although the Lady of Pain was very powerful, she was definitely not a god. This was because since ancient times, no god would kill someone because of their belief and worship. However, the Lady of Pain did so, and more than once. She was an even more ancient existence. Even for the most powerful gods, the Lady of Pain was full of mysteries. It was precisely because of this that when the Arcane Kingdom was destroyed, something was left behind in the Sigil City. The gods couldn't enter the Sigil City, which led to some survivors of the Arcane Kingdom's era struggling at death's door in the Sigil City. They were the fallen witch's target. Soren had no way of entering the sigil. Even if he tried to force his way in, he might be attacked by the Lady of Pain, or be imprisoned by her. It was said that greater divine powers had the right to enter Sigil City and were not afraid of the Lady of Pain. However, this was only a legend because death god Jurgil had never heard of anyone going to Sigil City for no reason. Soren was unable to enter Sigil City. If that was the case, it would be dangerous for the fallen witch to enter Sigil City alone. This was something that Soren had always been concerned about. He cared about the fallen witch. Perhaps the two of them used to be enemies, but after experiencing so many things, the fallen witch had proven herself. She was Soren's most important ally and an important woman by his side. The staff of Archmage made up for this problem very well. With the staff of Archmage, even if the fallen witch faced a god in the form of a saint, she could still escape if she couldn't win. The floating city was a very important thing, and the fallen witch had paid too much for it. Soren couldn't stop her from going to Sigil City, so he could only think of ways to increase the safety of the fallen witch. Motor City, Governor's Mansion, Study. Soren sat at the desk. In front of him was a thick book that recorded everything about Sigil City. Sigil City. Soren slowly closed the book and murmured, "The gods are not omnipotent. There is such a place in the multiverse that they can't do anything about." About 30% of the research on elemental fission had been completed. Although it was still impossible to open the super-large, anti-magic lock, it seemed that it was about to make the entire Motor City fly. The fallen witch needed some important information in Sigil City. For this reason, she had already prepared to go, and after getting the help of Soren, she had already begun to plan her itinerary. All the preparations were about to be launched. The fallen witch was about to go to Sigil City, Gloria was perfecting the golem factory and studying the prophecy, clergy, Vivian was familiarizing herself with how to become a true god, and Soren had also begun the most important step before the plan. On this day, the most dazzling newcomer in Motor City, the talented rogue, the legendary rogue named Ugly Monkey, returned after completing the mission in Shipwreck Bay and was summoned to the temple by Soren. In the magnificent temple, the statue of Soren was in the center. After continuous transformation, Soren's temple had become a giant god temple, and when he was promoted to a greater divine power, the temple would be expanded to the size of a pantheon. Of course, the real pantheon should belong to a greater divine power, just like the real pantheon in the astral world, where all the gods had a mirror image in it. It was said that there was once a greater divine power god who ruled many divine systems, and the pantheon was also created at that time. Of course, legends were just legends, and there was nothing that could be verified. Because so far, all the known gods had only appeared close to a greater divine power, but there had never been a true greater divine power. In the temple, Soren's figure appeared. He was shrouded in golden light, and in front of him was Ugly Monkey, who was kneeling on one knee. This was a very good newcomer, who rose in endless slaughter and promoted to legendary strength in just a few years. Although there was also Soren's favor, his ability and temperament were undoubtedly excellent. This was a talented, hardworking, and smart believer, and also the mainstay of Soren's church. But today, Soren had an almost certain death task for him. Above the temple, Soren looked down at Ugly Monkey in front of him, and a majestic voice came out, "You proved your loyalty to me, and also proved your ability to me. Now, I have a very important but dangerous task for you. Are you willing to accept it?" Ugly Monkey's figure knelt on one knee. His expression was solemn, and he looked at Soren resolutely and firmly. Then he lowered his head and humbly said, "I have already dedicated myself to my Lord. Death is not the end for me, because I will always follow my Lord's footsteps." There was no hesitation. After hearing that Soren had an almost certain death task for him, there was no hesitation on Ugly Monkey's face, only determination and a hint of joy. You're tuning into the Dreamy Love Stories YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.